Hi there. This is the start of Saw Retrospective. I've decided to talk about the entire Saw series because I think it's one that's very interesting. A lot of people write it off as being gore porn or bad, and it can be that at times, definitely. It's a valid criticism sometimes. I don't dislike any of the movies. They're all very different. They're kind of all over the place, really, ranging from kind of a noir detective thing to like gore porn to thriller, slasher. They're all over the board, all sorts of different tones, whether they're going for serious or kind of going for silly. And there's something really fascinating about that to me. I think most of them I like in some form. Not all equally, but I think all of them have some merit to them. So I've decided to just look at all of them, talk about them a little bit in this kind of casual setting that I did with my ASMR video. So I'm just gonna look through the whole series. I've seen them all before, multiple times.
Hello. Do you want to play a game?
So Saw Rebirth. This was a digital comic made by IDW. I'm a little unclear as to when exactly it came out. It seems to have either been directly after Saw 2 or in the lead up to Saw 2. It's essentially an origin story for Jigsaw. It's available to watch online. You can tell it's non-canon pretty quick. It's very different from the things we'd learn later. At the time it was made, things wouldn't have been fleshed out. It came out in 2005, and they just ignored the comic wholesale whenever it contradicted something they wanted to do. It implies a little bit that the guy who was in the barbed wire trap in the first movie, Jigsaw had known beforehand, and some other minor stuff like that. A little expansion on Zepp, but there are some blatantly contradictory things in there as well. John Kramer's made out to be pretty pathetic and wimpy. He basically talks about wasting his life and doing nothing. The comic even directly says that Jill left him for being kind of pathetic and wimpy, which we find out is absolutely not the case. Completely different. Completely 100% nothing like what we eventually got. It's a digital comic, so it's presented weirdly. I mean, it's like digital comic panels with voiceovers, and it kind of just flashes through them. It's truthfully not all that interesting. It's basically just a short, like 7 or so minute prequel to the first movie that tries to explain John's character. So much of it has been retconned now that it's virtually worthless. Besides just the art's not all that good. I'm not much of a comic guy, but it's pretty mediocre looking throughout, and I don't know, the digital comic format's a little lame. Whoever they got to voice John Kramer in this one was certainly no Tobin Bell either.
Hello. Do you want to play a game?
Saw 2003 is a short film. It was used as essentially a proof of concept for studios when they're pitching the movie around. It's basically a recreation of Amanda's trap from the first movie, where she's in the reverse bear trap and has to cut the key out of a corpse that turns out to be alive. And the short film is essentially 10 minutes of that. There's a little bit of an introduction, and then pretty much just that. As far as it goes, there's not a lot to it. There wasn't intended to be. It's more or less a proof of concept. It is fairly interesting to see. A lot of ideas get started here. Billy the Puppet is there, although there's not a clear, like, Jigsaw character. The credits don't even list who played Billy. I would assume it was either Leigh Whannell, or Leigh Whannell, who plays Adam, also plays David in this one, in this short film. He's also the screenwriter for the first movie, as well as a couple of the other ones. It's also interesting to think the reverse bear trap was such a huge part of this series, appearing time and time again. Even in 2003, though, it proved to be ineffective. I mean, the only person who ever died from the reverse bear trap died in Saw 3D, so it took him, 7 years to finally have that thing go off. It's almost shot for shot the scene that we see play out with Amanda in the final version of the film. It is kind of adorable. I mean, you can tell it is a short film, a proof of concept with very little budget. They're in some kind of warehouse with a fog machine and a strobe light and 4 actors. Super, super tiny. It's hard to rate it as a movie because it's not a movie, but it's definitely interesting to visit as a Saw fan just to see like how close the origin was. Like, this is the original concept, and so much of what's in this concept is still in the movies. One thing that they did remove, Billy the puppet has a bowler hat in this one, which is adorable, which is probably why they took it off of him. He doesn't look very intimidating. He's got a tiny little hat. But yeah, that's the Saw 2003 segment. There's not a lot to say, obviously, because it's 10 minutes long. But it is good. I did like looking at it.
Hello. Do you want to play a game?
We're going to talk about Saw 1 real quick. This is obviously the start of the franchise. It establishes the ground for everything else. Technically, this is based on a short film that came out. So there are elements of that short film that are reused. This one is quite a bit different from the others. This one I'd describe as sort of a detective noir film. Almost. It's odd. A good majority of this first movie takes place all in one space, which is the bathroom. For anyone who's seen it, you know that's the primary location. A lot of the movie takes place in this spot, and we only have 2 characters in there for the most part. There's Lawrence Gordon, who is a surgeon who's there both partially because he cheated on his wife, which Jigsaw frowns on, and also because he apparently misdiagnoses Jigsaw's cancer, which causes it to progress to the state it's in. And then Adam, who is a photographer. He's not a photographer, he's kind of like a private investigator, I suppose. They're stuck there together. They don't know why they're there. And a large portion of the movie focuses on their efforts to get out of it. The room itself is a very interesting set. Unlike most of the traps in this series, which are more deadly, this one is more of a puzzle where they're forced to just kind of work together to find a way to get out of the room. They don't really get along, so there's a lot of like fighting between them about the whole situation. They distrust each other a lot, and they both kind of butt heads even though they're trying to work together at the same time, which is an interesting dynamic. It gives the movie a really unique feel of them just being locked in this room, kind of like a real life escape room. So I think that aspect of it is very interesting. The trap itself is basically just them solving a bunch of smaller puzzles. There is a little bit of an aspect of mystery to it, too. A lot of it, since it's the first one in the series, John Kramer isn't established. This is technically a spoiler, but I don't think the identity of Jigsaw is a big spoiler at this point because he's on the poster of half the movies. The trap is a little unfair with the key to the locks gets flushed down the drain right away, and they really had no way around that. But it's an interesting set, and I like seeing them interact with each other. I do think Adam is a fairly strong actor. Gordon is kind of bad for the most part. This is something I've always thought, but truthfully, Gordon's not so bad for most of it. He's a little overacting. He kind of feels like a soap opera actor almost, which he may have been. I don't know his background, the actors. But especially towards the end of the movie, he gets injured, which I'll go over in a minute once I get to spoilers, but he loses a lot of blood, and so he becomes like weak, and in an attempt to portray that weakness, he starts doing like this weird fakey raspy voice. I don't think it's just not it. It's a little off. Unlike most of the movies, there isn't a big time skip, or the main twist of the movie doesn't have to deal with time skips as they often do. The other half of the movie is basically, well, there's 2 smaller sections to the movie, I suppose. A good majority of it takes place in the bathroom. There's also 2 detectives. There's Cho, I believe his name is, as well as David Tapp. His son is the main character of one or both of the video games, Tapp. Detective Tapp, who's played by Danny Glover. And I do really like Danny Glover in this movie, and all movies. And he's trying to solve the mystery of who the Jigsaw killer is. This is like early on in Jigsaw's career. So we do see a couple other traps through that, although there's nothing too dramatic. There's the razor wire trap where some guy has to crawl through a bunch of razor wire because he cut himself. One where a guy gets covered in like flammable jelly, and he has to hold a candle and walk around a room full of broken glass to uncover the passcode for a safe to get an antidote for poison, which is a little over the top. And then there is the first appearance of the famous reverse bear trap, which is put on Amanda's head. Amanda, of course, becomes one of Jigsaw's apprentices throughout the rest of the series moving forward. One of the most important characters, definitely one of the most reoccurring. Jigsaw's character does not feel fully fleshed out yet. I believe Gordon himself says that Jigsaw doesn't kill anybody, he puts them in traps and they kill themselves. Which is funny because there's the recent 4chan meme where they talk about how Jigsaw couldn't be charged with murder, only kidnapping. I'd probably pull that into question. In some of the movies, maybe you could almost say that, but in this one, Jigsaw gets up to some shenanigans. I mean, Amanda's trap is probably one of the stupidest in the series, where her win condition for the game, as it was, is to murder someone else. No physical harm to her needed, she just gotta kill some other guy. So that one feels a little unbalanced in her favor, and I don't know, that one seems a little questionable on the Jigsaw murder spectrum. There's also some other guy who gets put in a chair with like drills in his head. The cops are supposed to find a key in a pile of other keys in 20 seconds to let him out. That guy, I don't know how he was supposed to get out of that one either. I know that was more a test for the cops, but still. And then in that same sequence, Jigsaw also slits Tap's throat, which he survives, but you know, the intention of murder was definitely there. It doesn't seem like he intended Tap to survive that one. And then Cho ends up having his head blown off by a tripwire shotgun, which again, I'm not a legal expert, but I don't know if that's choosing to die. Walking into a concealed tripwire and having your head blown off. Especially because the cops technically don't do anything wrong besides their job, like they investigate Jigsaw, which is not wrong. It is quite a bit simpler of a movie. I mean, clearly it's very limited in budget. There's nothing overly extravagant about it. There's not the gallons of blood and elaborate traps that the rest of the movies have. It's almost entirely set in the bathroom, which is a quality I actually really like about it. Not just the simplicity, but the framing everything in one set and having a lot of the character, pretty much everything in the movie just be kind of this small conflict between Adam and Gordon and them kind of growing as friends in their own way. Well, I don't know about friends, but they somewhat learn to work together. So there is definitely something to say about that. Everything that happens in this movie is so significant to the latter ones. The entire twist is essentially spoiled by the poster of every movie from here forward. And then, you know, Tobin Bell as Jigsaw is fairly recognizable, so I'll still put a thing up here if you're really concerned, but I'll be brief. Throughout the movie, Zepp is another section of the story. He's a nursing aide at the hospital that Gordon works at, and he's also put into a game. From what I've read on the wiki, the reason he's in a game is because he told John Kramer that Gordon cheated on his wife, and like Jigsaw got mad that he was bad-mouthing people behind their backs or something. I don't know. But he gets poisoned. He's told that if Gordon can't escape his game, then Zepp is supposed to shoot his wife and daughter in the face. Otherwise, he'll die of poison. You know, again, we're going back to that thing where Jigsaw's motives and, like, MO don't seem fully fleshed out yet, where Zepp really didn't do that much wrong. I mean, maybe in the eyes of Jigsaw he did, but it's questionable. And also using innocents as a pawn in his game and, you know, slaughtering them, potentially. A little questionable. The real big twist, obviously, the first twist is that Zepp isn't the villain. He's also being controlled by the game, but the big twist is that the corpse in the room with them, in the bathroom, with Gordon and Adam, is actually Jigsaw, pretending to be dead. He's lying on the ground motionless for the entire movie. He's in almost every shot in this movie, pretending to be a corpse so he can monitor the situation, and I don't really know why he did that. I think it was to foil them cheating, because they do try to cheat the system a few times, which is another aspect I really enjoy, watching them kind of like try to outplay the game. and then the eventual realization that they can't. So I think he's monitoring it because Zepp is also monitoring it, but he's using like really janky early 2000 monitoring equipment to do it, and they're definitely able to sneak some stuff past Zepp, but they aren't able to sneak it past Jigsaw. Did it need to be a twist? No, but at the same time, it's also one of my favorites. There's something incredibly, I mean, you don't expect it. It's goofy, it's kind of awkward, but at the same time, it's entertaining. And seeing John Kramer basically for the first time, having him stand up and just like slam the door on Adam at the end after Gordon escapes. Gordon eventually cuts his own foot off to escape, promises Adam he'll be back, and then Jigsaw stands up and locks Adam in the room and leaves him there. The bathroom sets become pretty iconic to the Saw franchise. It's revisited again a few times. Saw 3D, aka Saw the Final Chapter, aka Saw 7, revisits it, as well as Saw 2, and it's seen a couple times in Saw 3 and 4. I think that's mostly flashbacks, though. I might be wrong about it being in 4. I'm almost positive it's in 3, though. It's a very strong ending, and it also gives us our first insight into Jigsaw as a character. Basically, he talks a little bit about how he got cancer and he wants to make people appreciate their lives by putting them in these traps. That's its intention, and that's made fairly clear early on with the whole Amanda tells her story in the police station, says that being put in Jigsaw's trap helped her get off drugs, which is why she was in her trap. So we do learn a little bit about Jigsaw. I think he's fairly undeveloped in this one, though. He's pretty much a featured cameo, and I think they knew that they were going to make at least one sequel to build on him. By the time Saw 2 rolls around, he becomes borderline the main character of the franchise. Definitely the strongest characterization and largest presence in it. So that covers the plot. As far as it goes, the other aspects, you can tell this is pretty cheap, low budget, borderline student film. I believe the original Saw short film was a student film, and it was developed into this concept, but it's still clearly pretty cheap. Production design for what it is isn't terrible. The movie's definitely low budget. The production design is fine. A lot of the sets are kind of setty. The bathroom looks very good. I've never seen a bathroom that looks like that, but it's dirty. It's well framed with the layout of it, and you get really familiar with the layout. They had to make that part good because you spend so much time there, but like Gordon's house, which is visited, slightly apartment or whatever it is, looks like the house from The Room, which is just like cheap sets. Some of the other spots don't look too good either. One thing I will say, James Wan, who you may know from directing The Conjuring, Aquaman, there's a lot of the traits of early James Wan here, a lot of close-ups. The color correction at times can be pretty horrendous. There's the razor wire and the flammable jelly scenes are both color corrected to be very, very green, which is it's a bit much. Even the bathroom set is color corrected pretty severely to sort of a gray blue. I think that one works a little better. It's a basement, supposed to have like the synthetic light, so I think it works a little better on that set. Hello Zepp is introduced in this one, which is the main theme, and it's actually named after Zepp, the character in this movie, and it's still named that to this day. And this is the first appearance of that, which is a very, very good theme. The rest of the music is meh. As far as acting goes, like I said before, Gordon, he's pretty bad for the most part. I think Adam is actually fine. Gordon's wife is also pretty rough, and we don't get a lot of Topin Bell, so I'm not even going to bother grading him. Zepp is fine. I really like Danny Glover's character, although his partner is not great. He's not awful, but he's not great. He's a little bit... They tried to make him almost they kind of do a buddy cop dynamic before his death, where he'll crack jokes about how Tap needs to get a girlfriend. So he's a little bit of a different character. He does provide a little bit in there. Amanda's in this movie as well, but she's not in it enough that I can really say her acting is good or bad either way. That's more of a thing to judge on in Saw 2 and 3, where she's much more prominent, 2, 3, and 4. So this section is a little shorter. The movie's a lot simpler, so it's a little bit harder to dig into. I really do appreciate the simplicity of the movie. And I really, really do enjoy this one. It's probably the legitimate best film in the series. Perhaps not my favorite. And it certainly has flaws with the shooting, the directing, and the acting. But as far as it goes, it doesn't fall into that gore porn that people hate the franchise so much for. And it doesn't have a lot of the trappings that the later entries do. It's kind of a blend of detective noir, and you got the two guys in the room and they're just talking. I think it's a really interesting film, very, very unique and different from the rest of the series. And obviously it is the first one, so it's a good place to start if you're interested in the series. As far as it goes, I would definitely recommend this one as an entry point to the series, which should be obvious from it being the first, but it's relatively low gore and relative high quality, not being good because of being goofy and kind of awkward and also being over the top. Like, it doesn't have those qualities. So if this is a series you're interested in, even moderately, Saw's not a movie, Saw 1's not a movie that's going to make you sick or give you nightmares. There's a little bit of violence and brutality, but it's pretty subdued, pretty low key, especially compared to the rest of this franchise. So I'd say give it a go. It's very interesting, kind of an interesting experiment in filmmaking almost, just because of how different it is. So yeah, I think that about concludes Saw 1. So we'll move on to Saw 2 now. We'll move on to Saw 2 now. Also, I'm sure you've noticed, but my appearance has changed. I've been watching these movies one at a time because I don't know if my sanity could handle sitting through all these in one go, so you'll probably see some slight differences in my outfit. So the parts, they might look a little mismatched. I'm going to try my best to kind of keep them relatively the same so it's not too jarring, but I thought I'd just throw that little explanation in there real quick.
Hello. Do you want to play a game?
Full Disclosure Report is a short bonus feature that was included on the first DVD for the first movie. What it is a fictional news broadcast. It's kind of like 60 minutes, but it covers the events of the first movie, and that's about all there is to it. I mean, it's kind of a funny concept to see. Like, something like this could have been a scene in one of the movies, just discussing Jigsaw and serving as kind of a catch-up. But truthfully, it kind of just is a really brief summary of the first movie with like little extra things thrown in. Like, they couldn't get any of the actors back. This thing's shot cheap as shit. All the actors in it, there's like some guy with a hat standing on like a fucking curb that they talk to, and they have a sit down with Gordon's wife's like sister or something, and it's just some random person, and they're just in this tiny little studio. There's nothing here to really talk about. They use a lot of clips from the movie and a lot of like still images from the movie, but it doesn't really add anything. There's no like grand reveal or anything that wasn't already in the movie. There's no background information or lore really. It's kind of just like a goofy look at the movie through the lens of a fake TV show, fake like news report on it. And all the news stuff is pretty awful. I don't know who they got to make this or why. The shooting and the acting is pretty much YouTube video tier, where it's just like, it looks like someone put this together as like a Saw parody fan film thing. There's nothing impressive or even interesting about it, to the point where I question why it was made. So yeah, that's that's about it. As far as is it canon, I'm gonna say there's nothing that contradicts anything, but there's also nothing in it. So I mean, you can assume it's canon if you want for your next rewatch, but I probably wouldn't waste the 15 minutes.
Hello. Do you want to play a game?
Saw the video game. Yes, for those who don't know, there is a video game. It's published by Konami. It could be generously called a Silent Hill clone. Not a good one, but you could call it that. As fitting with the theme of the retrospective, I mostly wanted to talk about this story. I will give some general thoughts about the game, I'll have a longer review coming out specifically about the game with footage and editing and written beforehand that I'm hopeful about. So that should be out soon after this video. I'm praying. But fuck me, man. This is a video game. So the plot. You play as David Tapp. Yes, that David Tapp. This game is non-canon, I suppose. It contradicts things, but at the same time, I suppose it could be potentially canon. It's not like there's not enough contradictions and weird shit going on in the Saw franchise already. So David Tapp is captured by Jigsaw after he's shot by Zepp, which he survives, and he is put in Whitehurst Asylum. Yes, an asylum. Yes, an old abandoned asylum. The most cliche horror game location you can possibly imagine. David has to go through a game where he rescues a bunch of people. Yes, it has the Saw 3 story, the Saw 3D story. There's some familiar faces, there's some cameos and references. You start off by rescuing Amanda. Of course. Who else? Girl who's in every movie except Jigsaw. This game, it takes place directly after Saw 1, so before Saw 2 by a while. So I'm not sure if in the canon of this game she's actually captured and being rehabilitated again for going back on drugs, or if it's another ruse. I don't know. It's hard to tell. It's not really explained. She just kind of wanders off after you save her. After that, you kind of just keep wandering around. You get brief glimpses of Pighead, who is just a unnamed apprentice of Jigsaw's. You don't unmask him. He's named Pighead, and you kill him eventually. Next up, you save an original character named Jennings Foster. Jennings is he's also a police officer who killed someone in a hit and run, a homeless person. You free him, and he runs off, as they do. Next up, you save Melissa Singh. She's the wife of Tapp's partner, Singh, who is in for not being a good enough mother after her cop husband died. You save her. She also runs off. I imagine a lot of that is because they didn't want to make AI that followed you for long. So next up, you save Oswald McGillicuddy, who's an interesting one. An article that this character wrote, Oswald, appears in the first movie written by Tapp. Very briefly, it's just like, his name's just like there. And it was just some throwaway, whatever name that they used for the prop designer used. Oswald has been expanded into a fullish character. He's a journalist who wrote a bunch of articles about Tapp after Singh's death, accusing him of being Jigsaw. Also, there's collectibles. Well, I guess they're not really collectibles. The game doesn't really track them, but you can find like pieces of lore scattered around. And apparently he was going to write a book about the Jigsaw Killer and work on it with Pamela Jenkins. Pamela Jenkins, although I didn't mention her much in the actual Saw 6 part of this, because she's not that important, is the sister of the main character, from William Easton from Saw 6. I thought they were dating. I didn't realize they were sisters. I thought that was like his mistress. But anyway, Pamela's brought up she was going to write a book with Oswald and then stole all his notes and wrote the book herself, I guess. It's a very brief lore entry about that. Her brother's company, the William Easton is the guy who ran the insurance company that denied Jigsaw's coverage. The insurance company is also briefly mentioned on a note. There's a note where employees who are getting laid off from the asylum closing can get referred to the insurance company. There's a lot of lore about the asylum and how it abused its patients and used to participate in MK Ultra. It's really weird. It's really weird for a Saw game. You think they'd want to build on the lore of stuff we already know about, but that's not important. Also, there is at least one brief mention of Hoffman in a newspaper clipping saying he's taking over position as lead investigator. That's all Hoffboy gets, though, unfortunately. After you save Oswald, he gets killed by a booby trap 10 seconds later. Next character is also a reference might be well known. Next up is Obi. Obi, of course, appears in Saw 2. He's the guy who helped Jigsaw kidnap all the other participants in the house trap, and he gets burned in the furnace. And in this game, he's also in a furnace. You know, there are a lot of traps in this game. There's lots of shotgun tripwires that instantly kill you. It's very fun. Shotgun doors. You start the game in the reverse bear trap. All the survivors are in some. Amanda's in a weird one where you have to give her mixes of antidote and poison, and also yourself by like juggling balls. They're all just like really weird puzzles. The Jennings Trap is a giant pendulum thing that lowers towards him, kind of like Hoffman's from Saw 5. Hoffman's first trap that we see in Saw 5. The one that introduced him to Jigsaw. Melissa is in, it's like a big thing with razor blades and it clamps shut on her if you don't do Pokemon block pushing puzzles fast enough. Oswald is in one that's kind of like the neck breaker one from Saw 3. What's that one called? Where he's like this, the guy who killed his kid. And he like twists him. It does that. But yes, Obi is back in another furnace, different furnace. So that's quite the choice. Jigsaw really liked to put him in furnaces twice. You rescue Obi, he gets pissed at you because apparently there's a little change where before Saw 2, Obi was obsessed with Jigsaw and wanted really bad to be tested by him to prove his will to live. So Obi intentionally got himself put in this trap, and then you come in and save him, which he does not appreciate. And then he runs off, and obviously he returns in Saw 2 as a major character. He's major. I'd call him major. The last victim is Jeff. Jeff was the man in the head crusher thing that Tap and Sing rescued from the warehouse that caused Sing to die. Apparently, after that event, for some reason, Tap assumed that Jeff knew something about Jigsaw and was like harassing him and following him, which made him suicidal. I feel like this part was written with like Dr. Gordon in mind, since that makes moderately more sense. Maybe I'm wrong, but the dev team was probably like, hey, can we use Dr. Gordon? And the Twisted Pictures was probably like, no, we're using him in Saw 3D. It's a little odd, and then he runs off as well because AI is hard. Lastly, Tap finally gets his own little test. Tap's test. Well, I mean, his major test. At the end of the game, you get a key and there's 2 doors. You pick a door and you go through it. The extent of his test is basically doing a bunch of the same stuff you've done throughout the whole game, which is like solve annoying puzzles, do some really bad combat. The canon ending is the freedom door, according to what I've read on the wiki, which is odd because the freedom ending is bad. The freedom ending is the good ending, I think. Kinda. It's like one short cutscene where the non-canon truth ending has more gameplay and then a far longer cutscene. In the freedom ending, Tap finally learns to let go of Jigsaw. Doesn't want to chase him anymore. He just wants everyone to be safe, which is fine. You know, he learned his lesson. Everyone's happy. Everyone goes home. Everyone's safe, which we don't see in the game. In the game, the cutscene is we see Tap at his house looking at newspapers, calling him a hero and stuff, and then he shoots himself in the head. And the cutscene is like 30 seconds long, maybe like a minute and a half with the credits. And the credits play on like, they're like this much of the screen on like a tiny TV, you can barely read it. And I was playing in widescreen. It's really bizarre because the truth ending, which is non-canon from what I understand, has some more gameplay where you chase Jigsaw around and then you follow Jigsaw in the courtyard and beat him to death. But the person in the courtyard is not Jigsaw. It's Melissa Singh, Singh's wife. ex-wife. Is it an ex-wife if you die? So Tap beats her to death, and she has her mouth sewn shut so she can't say anything. She was put in a second game by Jigsaw. She had to keep Tap on track the whole game, otherwise Jigsaw would kill her kid, and so he runs out there and beats her to death, which causes him to go insane and end up in a mental asylum where he thinks he's still in Jigsaw's trap. That is a far more Saw ending than the other one. The other one also feels like they worked on it for like 2 hours, called it a day. This one almost feels like an ending. Needless to say, there's not a lot of story going on, which is okay for a video game, but also it's pretty repetitive. It's got the Saw 3 formula, which I think I've shown distaste for in general throughout the rest of this video. The movies that use that formula tend to be my least favorite. But as far as it goes, assuming that this is canon or some kind of semi-canon, it's a little weird the way it ties into other things. Like, David Tap survives. That's fine, I guess. I mean, it contradicts some of the other stuff. It feels weird to choose Tap for a few reasons. After the first movie, he's basically a non-entity to the franchise, especially for a franchise that references things and brings people back so much. He really just is not in it very much. He doesn't have a lot to do. He doesn't talk much. Obviously, he doesn't look like Danny Glover, and obviously they didn't drag Danny Glover out for this game. He's basically a non-entity in the series besides this game after the first movie. He's mentioned briefly a few times. There's like a picture of him in one of the movies, but that's about all he gets after the first movie. You don't learn an awful lot about anyone. You don't learn a lot about David Tap. We already knew he was super obsessive about the case. You don't learn anything about Jigsaw. You learn a lot about this asylum for some reason. It doesn't help that the game itself is pretty bad, but even in the realm of Saw movies, which tend to have fairly shallow plots, this is an excessively shallow plot where not much happens. So yeah, it does have some nice little references and nods, but as far as it goes, there's very little of worth in this game. It's pretty miserable to sit through, which is unfortunate to say, but that's just the way it is, I guess. So yeah, next up is Saw 2 Flesh and Blood.
Hello. Do you want to play a game?
Saw 2 Flesh and Blood is a sequel to the first Saw game, and probably the last Saw game we'll ever get. It follows Michael Tap, the son of David Tap, who is put into Jigsaw's trap because he was the one who released his father's confession that he had gone to Jigsaw's warehouse without a warrant. This happened during the first movie, which is what caused him to lose his job. It picks up shortly after the first game, I think a few months after the canon ending that I discussed in the previous segment, and a lot of it is what you would expect. Michael is forced to go about saving people from Jigsaw's traps. Nothing stunning, as you can imagine. Unlike the first game, the documents that you can find reference a lot of characters from the movies, a lot more than the notes in the first game did. Lots of references to people like Hoffman, Amanda, just tons of various references, Gordon, as well as some audio tapes from David Tap that bridge the gap between the first and second games, which I guess would have been recorded after the ending of the first game, but before the ending of the ending. This game is a little better narratively. It does have a twist in it. Not a fantastic one, but obviously this is the spoiler section, but at the start of the game you play as Campbell Iman for the first chapter, and Campbell's in his own test, and depending on the outcome of Campbell's test, which takes place right at the end of the main game, depending if Campbell lives or dies, Michael survives. We don't technically know which one is canon, although I think it's safe to assume Michael surviving is the canon ending. In the bad ending, Michael dies and then Campbell confronts Jigsaw and dies. Well, in the canon ending, Michael survives, and then Jigsaw offers him the choice of either freedom or joining him. We don't know which one Michael ends up choosing, Presumably this was a tease for the third game that never happened, alongside a few other minor teases, like the character of Pighead 2 has a little setup where it's mentioned that Pighead 2 was a friend of David Tapp, but his identity is never revealed. As far as characters from the movies that make appearances, most of the characters are original to the game. The only returning character is Carla, the woman that Gordon was having an affair with in the first movie. She appears in this game for a little bit, becomes kind of an ally to Michael for about 2 chapters of the game. A lot of the other references to continuity are pretty slim. There's a new pig head running around we don't learn a lot about. Like I said, there's a lot of sequel teasing. And of course, Jigsaw appears. This time he appears in the flesh. Pretty much the role you'd expect. As far as it goes, game's probably even worse than the first one, to be entirely honest. Combat has been simplified down to quick time events. The combat wasn't good before, but this is not the fix. It is a little more puzzle focused. The puzzles do tend to be a little better, but it's still not great. It is a nice bit of insight. The idea that David was sold out by his son, which is what caused him to lose his job, is an interesting angle. Granted, it's more or less non-canon and baseless, because you think that would have come up at some point in the first game or in the first movie. You know, it is an interesting little bridge there, and it does give a little bit of detail into Hoffman and Amanda and a couple others, so that's something.
Hello. Do you want to play a game?
Saw 2. Obviously, the first Saw was a pretty big success. You don't make 7 sequels to a movie that's not. Saw 2, a little background, actually started its life as a different movie. It was called The Desperates. The director of this movie, which was not James Wan, his name was something else, wrote a script for a movie called The Desperates, which was repeatedly rejected for being too close to Saw. This was a coincidence. He saw Saw and he's like, oh shit, everyone's gonna think I'm a big ol' asshole trying to rip off Saw. And so he took his script to Lionsgate, who was like, oh yeah, we can make that into another Saw movie. We were looking to make one. It's a little hard to tell how much of The Desperates is still in this movie. Obviously quite a bit. I would assume the general structure, although I couldn't find any concrete details. From the sounds of it though, they had a complete page 1 rewrite. They had to start the whole script over in order to put Jigsaw in and things of that sort. I thought that was an interesting little note. It's definitely different from the first movie. Even after the rewrite, it's quite a bit larger in scale. So we're gonna take a quick look at it. Like the Saw movies tend to be, this one is split into a few different parts. Only 2 this time. The first half is focused on Detective Eric Matthews, who's played by Donnie Wahlberg, and he is part of a group of police who have tracked down Jigsaw. Jigsaw demands that Eric Matthews, who is a corrupt cop by all accounts, talks to him for a set amount of time calmly in order to find the location of his son. The other half of the movie follows the story of his son, Daniel Matthews. The main focus of the movie is on Daniel, or the thing we see the most, I'd say. The Eric plot is still the A plot, but a lot of the movie does follow the B plot, the Daniel plot. Daniel Matthews has been trapped in a house along with some other people. Xavier, most of them are pretty unimportant. Amanda is the big one. Returning from the first movie, Daniel and all the other people have a relation to Eric Matthews. Eric Matthews has framed most of them for crimes or otherwise planted evidence to get convicted. It seems like they're all guilty of the crimes, but Eric Matthews is kind of guilty of subverting the process of law with them. They all have nerve gas in their veins, so they're under a pretty strict time limit to find antidotes that have been scattered throughout the house. And being a Saw movie, as you can imagine, they're put in a bunch of perilous situations, which I will talk about momentarily. So yes, those 2 plots run concurrently. They switch back and forth pretty frequently. A lot of the focus of the movie is on Eric, as Jigsaw's traps tend to do. He's trying to give Eric an appreciation for life, but not so much his own life, more the life of his son, because he's not very involved in his son's life, and he's kind of a a shitty father. And Jigsaw kind of wants to prove that he only cares when his son is in danger. It's a little hard to get into this one without getting into spoilers some, just because I think the twists are so impactful to the pretty much like everything that happens in the movie. As far as general thoughts go, I think this one's actually shot a little bit worse than the first one. Generally, the movie is shot a little bit better. There are some things I dislike though. It's a lot more dynamic this time around. The budget was obviously much higher, so we get some more dynamic stuff, more scenes, more gore. People can actually move around in this one. Color grading is horrendous. Just flat out gonna say it. 90% of the movie is pasty green, the inside of the house. I think it's to give the house a sickly feel. And I don't know about it. It's a lot. It's very green. It's not pleasant to look at. I don't like it. There's some other parts that have different colors. The Eric parts, they're not as heavily color corrected. They do tend to also have a green coloration to them, which I am not a fan of, although it's quite a bit more subtle in those scenes. Like I said, there's a lot more dynamic shooting, dynamic scenes. There's a little bit at the end where they color grade in a different way. They go for a very light blue, which is notable improvement over the green for sure, but still, I think whoever was color correcting went a little too far. The editing is very clever, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Overall, the acting is very, very improved. The Wahlbergs aren't known for their acting ability, but I think Donnie Wahlberg does a fairly good job here. You get to see a lot more of Tobin Bell, who plays Jigsaw. There's quite a bit of expansion into Jigsaw's character. In the first movie, we know almost nothing about him. We learn a little bit more about what caused him to go into this, how he attempted suicide, and after surviving, he got a new lease on life, and he wanted to put people through that same experience, which I think is an interesting little tidbit. As far as it goes, despite the increased violence, increased gore, it doesn't feel excessive still. There definitely are a couple scenes that are quite violent, but it doesn't feel as over the top as the later movies still. It's quite a bit more grounded. A lot of the violence is kind of between people. Another observation is that this movie is very, very similar to the first Cube in a lot of ways, between a group of people all locked in a space, going room to room with each other, trying to solve traps. Xavier, the drug dealer, is a lot like Quentin. He doesn't exactly have the same arc, which makes him a little weaker. Quentin in Cube kind of falls into a leadership role and then slowly becomes the antagonist. He becomes kind of insane and murderous, and Xavier kind of starts there, kind of just skips that whole regression, which takes away from it a little bit, but I do think there is something fun about the mixture of the concepts. Like, Xavier's basically a slasher villain, following them around in this death trap house that he's also stuck in. Like, it's odd. I think it kind of works. They probably should have fleshed it out a little more, because Xavier kind of vanishes from the movie for a good chunk of time. There's a little bit of contrivance to the plot too. But yeah, the acting, overall, everyone's fairly solid. It's shot competently but badly color graded. Moving into the spoilery stuff. As far as the traps go, which are, the big scary part, obviously the house itself is a giant trap, so that's the whole plot of the movie. We can gloss over that one. The furnace, I think, will get a lot of people. It's got a claustrophobic nature, and it's fairly severe and violent, although as far as it goes, it's a little like they play it up a little much. I know that sounds weird to say about Saw, but him slamming his hand against the glass and all that, I do like them breaking him out at the last second, but him just getting stuck in the window and still dying, and the antidote dying with him, which kind of drives the group apart. Then there's the needle pit, which Xavier throws Amanda into. They have to find a key in a pit of needles. It looks painful. It's not very gory. Again, people with the fear of needles probably probably going to be a lot rougher on them. I know a lot of people who have that fear. It's a common one. There's one where they aren't supposed to put a key in a door, and if they do, it shoots some guy in the head. That happens in like the first 3 seconds. They just wanted to get some core out of the way. And it is pretty violent, though. I mean, there's a crater in the back of his head that's impressive to look at. There's the hand raisers, where girl who's not Amanda and not the one who just dies with the lung infection, the nerve gas, puts her hands in to try to retrieve a formula, and it's a one-way door, like those fish basket things. She puts her hands in, but she can't get them out because they're razors and they cut her wrists. That's pretty brutal. That's the one that gets me. That one's rough. You know, the last part of the movie, not a whole lot of trapping going on, just a lot of Xavier chasing Amanda and Daniel around. The big reveals in this movie, which are important, is one, Eric is in a trap himself, kind of, more like a test, but at the end it's revealed that the video feed they were watching of his son Daniel going through the house was actually recording. It had already happened. Daniel was already safe, and he was in the safe that was in Jigsaw's compound. So, if Eric had managed to keep his cool, Eric Matthews had managed to keep his cool and talk to Jigsaw for the entire time, it would have been revealed to all been a ruse. His son would have popped out of the safe like he does at the end. Jigsaw would have been in custody, and everything would have worked out, but he was too much of a spastic and he ruined it. The other twist, which I think I spoiled in part 1, is that Amanda is working for Jigsaw now as an apprentice. After surviving her trap, she saw Jigsaw as a father figure for kind of reestablishing her will to live. And so she's put into the house to somewhat guide Daniel through it to make sure he doesn't die, I suppose. Which sometimes kind of seems out of her control. Like, Xavier was a big dude, and I know she was kind of in control, but there's also just as much of a chance that Xavier could have killed her and then Daniel would be fucking dead. In the end, Daniel also ends up slitting Xavier's throat, which is an interesting twist. Daniel does survive this. He was supposed to make an appearance in one of the later Saws. The actor was unavailable, so they just didn't, but presumably he's alive and well somewhere. Eric Matthews, he gives up on listening to Jigsaw. He beats Jigsaw up and forces him to take him to the house. Obviously by this time the house has been abandoned and empty. Eric Matthews runs through the house looking for his son. He ends up in the basement, and Jigsaw, being the 4-dimensional chess player he is, had planned this all out. Amanda is waiting at the house. The final part of Daniel's story, it's revealed that the house is actually above the bathroom from the first movie. The bathroom is a part of the house. So the final scene against Xavier, where Xavier finds out that there's a code to the safe, and that being in the safe is where you want to be to get out. And in order to find the code, he's killing everyone else to get the numbers that are written on the back of their necks. That's how you find out the code to the safe. He cuts off the back of his own neck to get the number from there. That's pretty grisly. I like that one. But Eric Matthews is taken by Jigsaw to the house. He goes into the basement and he is trapped in the bathroom. Presumably the implication is that he's trapped there and will die. So yes, Amanda traps him in the basement, in the bathroom. I did like getting to see the bathroom again. It's kind of got that feel of, like, in Dragon Quest II, the map for the original Dragon Quest is a part of the Dragon Quest II map, but it's really tiny. Like the Zelda 1 map is off on like the corner of the Zelda 2 map. So it's kind of fun. Like, you have this whole house that gets explored, and then you find out that the entire first movie took place in just a little section of that same house. So it's a nice little moment there. And I do like seeing the evolution of the bathroom. This takes place a short time after the first movie. The bathroom has been left in pretty much the same condition. Zep's body, as well as Adam's body, have just like begun to decompose. So there's like rotting flesh and like blood. It's real disgusting down there, and I don't remember exactly when we see the bathroom again. I know we do a few times. I know it's in Saw 3D, but also, now Xavier's body is down there as well, so it's gonna get even grosser. And that's the part of the movie I was talking about that had the blue color correction, in case that wasn't apparent by, the first movie was heavily color corrected blue in the bathroom as well. So yeah, I think that about covers all the bases. They do play Zepp, Hello Zepp Again, which is a track I'm fond of, as I've said. I don't particularly like the use of it this time. It's used during the final action scene against Xavier, kind of an action scene confrontation, I suppose you could call it, as opposed to when the reveals are happening. There's like a slight motif version of it that plays for the reveals, but I don't think it has like the same power necessarily in that context. It's just not as good to me. The rest of the soundtrack is a horror movie soundtrack. It is what it is. I do like this one. The first movie had a strong detective noir vibe. This one, it's not so much detective noir. It's kind of like I don't know exactly what the genre is called, but something similar to like Den of Thieves. It's like a grittier take on a cop movie. The cops aren't really good guys. There's that aspect with the Eric story. Him kind of playing like good cop, bad cop, dealing with this interrogation, stuff like that. I do like, it's different from the first movie in quite a bit of ways. The detective plot in the first movie was the B plot, and this one it's the A plot. It's not amazing, but it's serviceable. The Daniel plot is much more interesting. There's a lot of the idea of being trapped in the one room from the first movie has been blown up significantly, and there's more characters to bounce off of. The characters don't get along at all. They pretty much all hate each other. They're all at each other's throats, especially Xavier, which gives them a unique dynamic that I actually like. Kind of the infighting, but forced to work together. It's like Suicide Squad, but less stupid, believe it or not. So general thoughts. I think Saw 2 is fairly good. I don't think it's as strong as the first one in a lot of ways. I still think it's tolerable for people who aren't really into the whole gore thing. There are a couple scenes that are pretty bad depending on what your phobias are, but I think it is mostly watchable. As far as it goes, the first one is a really, really solid small movie. The second one is quite a bit bigger but still feels small. It's fairly solid as well. I certainly would not put it on the same level as Saw 1, but it's only a small step below. And unlike some of the other movies like Saw 5, which I enjoy for how over the top and silly it is, this is another one that's fairly subdued, which is another aspect I appreciate about it that the movies start to lose as they progress. So yeah, it's a little bit of a interesting twist on the formula that the first movie presented.
Hello. Do you want to play a game?
The Scott Tibbs documentary is our last DVD bonus feature short film thing. This one follows Scott Tibbs, who is friends with Adam. Adam, in a strange bit of continuity, actually mentions Scott in Saw 1. He says that his friend Scott stabbed him with a nail. And it was just a throwaway line, and whoever was making the DVD was like, okay, well, we can expand that into a character. This one, again, questionably canon. Doesn't really have a lot to say about the overall narrative or add anything to it. It's basically Scott Tibbs was Adam's friend, and he becomes interested in the Jigsaw Killer. He tries to make a documentary. In his quest to find the Jigsaw Killer, he's a huge asshole and no one actually wants him around, so he can't make the documentary. Then at the end he decides to make his own jigsaw trap and put himself in it, where he has to shred his hands in a paper shredder to get them free so he can stop himself from getting hit by an axe. Surprisingly enough, they somehow dragged the actress who played Amanda back for this one. She appears real briefly to punch a reporter in the face. This was a Saw 2 bonus feature, only on the DVD. Even as far as it goes, it's not particularly notable. The upload on YouTube is from 11 years ago, and it's still split into 2 parts. If the last DVD extra we watched is anything to go off of, the full disclosure report. This should have been just another, like, junky, throwaway, whatever. But somehow they dragged Amanda back into it just to punch some lady. I don't know why this exists, once again. I think it's either badly made, or the joke is at the end that everyone hates Scott, including all his friends, and so they tie him up extra hard and just leave the room when he's in his trap. One, because the production couldn't afford to, like, show him die, I guess, and maybe to leave it ambiguous, but two, I think the joke was that they just didn't like him and they wanted him to die, which is kind of funny. I mean, it's shot cheaply, but it's far more competent than, like, the full disclosure report was. There are actual actors who are kind of trying, and it's shot okay. It's supposed to be shot like a documentary. It's supposed to have the shaky cam found footage style. I think the shaky cam is added digitally after. There are times when maybe not, but the camera's really still most of the time, and, like, especially at the start, the movements of the shaky cam are really jerky, which leads me to believe that they're added digitally, which is an odd choice, especially because it would have been cheaper to just have some guy hold it and shake it around for real, almost assuredly. It's definitely not essential viewing. The last, like, 2 minutes of it could be cut into a little gag that a soft fan might, like, laugh at, but overall it's pretty much it's another nothing.
Hello. Do you want to play a game?
Alright, welcome back. There's nothing to be welcome back for. This is one video. So this segment's going to be a little bit different. In this part I'm going to talk about 3 and 4 together. The reasoning for that is that 3 and 4 take place simultaneously. The movies are more or less designed to be seen as a pair, despite the fact that they came out a year apart from each other, which is a little confusing. You essentially have to see both to get the full picture of either. Interesting choice, especially considering that they came out a year apart from each other. That makes them a little hard to talk about. The general plot of Saw 3 is Jigsaw is now on his deathbed. His cancer is in his brain is swelling, and he's dying. So in order to remedy this situation, Jigsaw and Amanda kidnap a surgeon named Lynn, who they plan to have keep Jigsaw alive for as long as possible. And in order to make sure she does, they put her in a shotgun collar that'll blow her head off literally to fucking pieces if Jigsaw dies. And while she's dealing with that, her husband has also been taken. Her husband struggles to let go of the death of his son, who was hit by a driver. So he's obsessed with his dead son, and he's put through a trial where he is given the opportunity to save people who he believes wronged him in his child's death. Like, it wasn't really a murder, it was more manslaughter. So there's a witness who didn't say anything in the trial. There's a judge who did not give the criminal a harsh enough sentence. And there is the driver who killed his son. He's not put in a lot of personal danger in order to save people. I mean, it varies a little bit from trap to trap, but so that's the general plot outline of 3. And I'll come back to 3 in a second. Parallel to this whole story is Saw 4. And Saw 4 mostly is only one story, which is a little refreshing. An officer named Rigg is put to a challenge with the main goal of him learning that he can't save everyone. He's put in situations where he has an opportunity to save people, but usually by doing so, doesn't end up in the best situations. Rigg's main motivation, he has an obsession with finding Eric Matthews, the detective who was played by Donnie Wahlberg in the second movie, and briefly appeared in the third as well. We find out that Eric Matthews is alive, and so he's trying to get to the bottom of his apartment complex in a time limit to try to rescue Eric Matthews before he's killed in his own death trap. There's a little bit of other stuff going on with Peter Strahm is another detective. Strahm believes that Rigg has become a Jigsaw accomplice, which is why he's hunting him down throughout the movie. He's only a few steps behind for the most part. And a lot of Strahm's parts, it does cut to Strahm quite a bit, although I wouldn't say there's a heavy focus on him. A lot of his parts are interrogating Jill Tuck, who is John Kramer's wife, Jigsaw's wife. 4 also does go quite a bit deeper into Jigsaw's backstory than we've seen before, as well as setting up the sequel some. As far as general thoughts go, I think 3 is probably my least favorite in the series. There's some interesting stuff. Apparently this movie was originally written to star Dr. Gordon from the first movie, the main character of the first movie. It's never been stated why that didn't work out, but there was a lawsuit involving the actor who played Dr. Gordon in the first movie over payment, so he may have declined to come back because of that, or they may have just changed their mind for other reasons. And also, an interesting piece of trivia is that in order to keep costs low, the crew did not rebuild the bathroom set for use in some scenes in this movie. They just borrowed the one that Scary Movie 4 had made for its Saw parody, which is hilarious. But anyway, as far as general thoughts, I think Saw 3 is really weak. I'm not sure which plot is the A plot and which is the B plot, but the husband side of the story, both sides feel really mean-spirited, which is odd to say because it's Saw. But I don't... The first couple Saw movies don't feel quite as mean-spirited. This one definitely ups the gore. There's some risk of physical harm for Jeff, although it's relatively safe for him. His test is to learn forgiveness, but he doesn't really have to if he doesn't want to. He can just let those people die. And that element of it feels really mean-spirited. And also, Jigsaw's whole thing with the doctor is part of an elaborate test. Like, the doctor truly didn't do anything to deserve her place. I think she cheated on her husband. She was pretty much just there to be a pawn in Jigsaw's game for Amanda. It's really mean-spirited, and also I think it's disgusting for the sake of it. Saw 1 and 2 I've talked about, but also even Saw 4 really tones down the gore, the violence, and the disgusting stuff. Compared to this one, this is the one that has like the most... You see Jigsaw's open brain surgery and like lots of scenes of getting holes drilled in his skulls, which is, you know, technically it's a medical procedure, but at the same time it feels a little like they're going for shock value, and especially the one where Jeff has to get a guy out before he drowns in ground pig juice, like pig blood from a meat thing, which is not only completely absurd and ridiculous, but just like, I don't know. And a lot of the lessons that Jigsaw's trying to teach are strange, or the other characters. He ends up saving the pig blood guy, who was the judge who didn't sentence the guy enough. Kind of didn't deserve to be there either. He says that if Jeff can't save the guy, the third trap that Jeff has to go through, the guy's in this big rig that like twists all his limbs and then his neck at the end, and in order to get the key for that one, he has to grab a key, and if he grabs it, he gets shot with a shotgun. And the judge guy's like, if you don't do it, you're a murderer. It's like, no, not really. You're an accomplice to murder because you didn't want to get shot in the face with a fucking shotgun, you dumbass. At this point, I've talked about the first 2 traps. I guess I'll run over the first one too, but the witness lady, you know, also a little shitty of her, but probably didn't deserve to be there. She's tied up in a freezer and having water sprayed on her, and he has to grab the key by pressing his face against metal bars, which rips some of his skin off. Not only is it a tiny bit over the top, silly, I mean, just like the pig one is, but at the same time, it's like, instead of pressing his face against the bars, he could have taken off his jacket and put that between him so that he didn't rip off a bunch of his skin. And I'll talk about the end of 3 in a second, because it is fairly impactful to the everything. Okay, as for general thoughts on Saw 4. 4, I like one of the better ones in the series. I like Rigg as a character. He's one of the few characters in this series who is genuinely like more or less a good person. His fault that he gets punished for is that he tries to help people too much, and he's apparently good at it. Like, he is obsessive about the Matthews case and stuff like that, but, you know, he does a decent job of helping people, and he's a cop, that's his job. He can be reckless and impulsive about it, which ties into the ending, and I do like that subtle thing. I'll save that for spoilers as well. He actually tries to help people. There's a series of traps. Again, most of them don't really focus on him. There's a lady who has her hair in a pulley thing, gear system, and he has to find the combination on the gears to get her out so that her scalp doesn't get torn off. And once she's released, she attempts to kill him because Jigsaw said so, and he ends up killing her. After that, there's a rapist guy who didn't get jail time, and Rig has to put him in a trap. I don't know why. It doesn't really tie to the theme. They just wanted to kill someone. I do like that death. He gets kablam. I guess it kind of ties into like the you can't save everything thing, because the guy got out of jail but was still raping people, or he still had the pictures. So like he didn't learn anything from his jail time, like he couldn't be saved in a rehabilitation sense maybe. The other one he had to assist someone with was the spike trap, where a husband and wife are impaled on a bunch of spikes together. The woman has minor injuries from the spikes, but the man will die if they're pulled out. And again, this one really has not much to do with Rig at all. He's just kind of there. Oh, her husband's abusive, so that's kind of whatever. Saw 4 also has a little one at the start, which is the Mausoleum, where two guys are chained together. One guy has his mouth sewn shut and the other has his eyes sewn shut, and they each have a key for they're on the chain, and it's slowly reeling in, and it'll choke them both out eventually. And they have to, I think the idea is they have to find a way to communicate to help each other out, but they just end up fighting and killing each other. Well, one of them dies, the other doesn't. And the other one comes back for the art. The one who survives comes back at the end of the movie, but the trap seems a little unbalanced in favor of the dude who has eyes. Like, you don't need a mouth to fight. To communicate, yeah, but if you're just gonna kill the other guy, having eyes is far better than a mouth. Regardless, there are a couple I missed in 3 as well. Saw 3 also starts with 2 traps that I neglected to mention. The first is just a random intro one. It's an unwinnable trap, which the detectives realized means it was set up by Amanda. Amanda's basically just doing her own thing and making unwinnable traps for people. Dude has to rip hooks out of himself to escape the room before a bomb goes off, but the door's welded shut, so it doesn't matter. And Amanda's just a murderer. She's an asshole. Same with the second trap she set up, which is also an Amanda trap, where the cop who was Matthew's partner has to stick her hand in a vat of acid to get a key. If she doesn't in time, she gets her ribs pulled out with hooks. It's kind of cool. It like flips out to be a giant angel. That one's also rigged. She actually gets the key and then gets gutted anyway. So in summation, Saw 3 is bad. Saw 4 is good. I'll talk about spoilers for both. Before I move on, I also wanted to mention, I think it's a bit odd. These 2 movies take place at the same time. They intersect at a lot of points. One thing that confuses me a bit is that they essentially have opposite messages, and that may be because of who set up the trap in Saw 4. In Saw 3, the lesson is you should forgive and help people. And in Saw 4, the message is you're helping people too much. I know they're different characters and they have different personal issues, if you can call being too helpful an issue, but still it's an odd contrast to make, whether it was intentional or not, to have one movie talk about like the merits of forgiveness and helping people, and then turn around and be like, you gotta stop helping people, dog. So let's get into spoilers for both of these movies. Singular movie that came out a year apart, awkwardly. So Saw 3 spoilers. The end of Saw 3 is an interesting clusterfuck. Basically, the husband Jeff gets through all his trials. He pretty much had no way not to, unless he was dumb enough to let himself get shot in the third trial. And he does get the key, but he steps out of the way and just ends up shooting the judge. Judge man just got really unlucky, but he gets the key too late to save the guy anyway, so oops. But Jeff finishes his trials basically unscathed and arrives at the room with Jigsaw and Amanda and his wife Lynn. Turns out Amanda is also in a test of her own, a test of not being a murderer. Jigsaw's a little salty at her for, the whole murder thing. Fair enough. And in response, Amanda, who is too dumb to realize she's being tested, shoots Lynn, which causes Jeff to come in and shoot Amanda. Lynn is still alive but dying. Amanda dies pretty quick because she gets shot in the throat. And Jigsaw's life has actually been saved by Lynn's operation. For the most part, he's doing better. The pressure in his skull's been relieved, so he's going to live a while longer. Jeff gets in there, and Jigsaw's like, hey, you have an important thing. You have to forgive me for everything I put you through. Jeff's like, yeah, I forgive you, and then he cuts Jigsaw's throat. And of course, Jeff had no way of knowing that Jigsaw's life was tied to his wife's. But Lynn, who's still alive and semi-conscious, also doesn't mention it until it's too late. She tries to stop him 1 second before he does it. He slashes Jigsaw's throat and kills him, which causes Amanda to die, and he becomes locked in the room, which comes back in Saw 4 briefly. But yeah, it is probably the least of a twist that the series has. I think it's fairly obvious all the way through that Amanda's being tested, and this movie does focus a lot on their relationship. Like I said earlier, I think the ending's really kind of mean-spirited about everything. The way Jigsaw treats Amanda, the way Amanda treats everyone, the way Jeff doesn't learn anything and just cuts Jigsaw's throat, Amanda getting her face turned into a crater. It's all very mean-spirited, even for Saw. Certainly an element that I think is part of what makes Saw 3 so weak. Again, talking about some of the other filmmaking stuff. Talking about the filmmaking in general for it, Saw 3 is pretty ugly all the way through. I know that's something I've said about all the movies, despite my other points about them. This one falls for a lot of the same sins with the color correction and overall kind of mediocre shooting. The Jeff scenes for the most part don't look that bad. They're not that strongly color corrected, but the hospital room that Jigsaw's in is very heavily color corrected green, which again, it's just not a good choice. A lot of the shooting for this one is pretty mediocre. There's nothing that really stands out. There's nothing even worth commenting on from a shooting standpoint. It feels like it was shot for efficiency, which it probably was. Music's all the same. Like I've said before, the music is mediocre in the series besides Hello Zep, which is iconic to the series. I don't even like the usage of it in this movie. I'm trying to remember exactly where it was, but I believe it's heard, instead of being during the twists, the revelation, where it's typically used, it's used in random scenes of Amanda helping set up various traps, including the bathroom trap. Overall, like I've said, I just don't like Saw 3 very much. As far as Saw 4 is where I'll get into the more major tie-ins, but Saw 4 opens and also ends with scenes of Jigsaw's autopsy, which is obviously a continuation from Saw 3. These scenes take place after everything that happens in 3 and 4. The big ending to the movie is Rigg finally makes it to where Matthews is. Matthews is in a rather elaborate Trap along with Hoffman, who actually briefly appears in 3 for the first time for about 30 seconds. They claim that 3 was supposed to be the last movie, but Hoffman's appearance kind of suggests otherwise. Like, they obviously had a plan for him, but he only has like 5 lines in 3. The guy from the Mausoleum Trap, who used to be Jigsaw's lawyer, is there administering the game because he has something on his spine that'll cut his spinal cord if he doesn't go through with it. Eric Matthews is hung by a chain and standing on an ice block, and the ice block is slowly melting. If it melts too much, he will be hung. Hoffman is also there, tied up. He's sitting in a chair. If Matthews isn't weighing down the block of ice, an electric current will be passed through the water that's melted off of the ice and electrocute Hoffman. Rigg arrives in the basement, and as he did at the start of the movie when Hoffman told him to never go through an unsecured door, he kicks the door in and sets off the trap. He didn't learn his lesson about unsecured doors, which is a nice little way to tie in the start and end of the movie, which causes 2 gigantic ice blocks to come and smash Matthews' head because he failed to go through the door correctly. The lawyer is also killed and Hoffman reveals himself. Hoffman was just playing along. It's implied that this trap was all Hoffman's idea, specifically because it's so focused on someone that 1, Jigsaw wouldn't know, and 2, that Hoffman had problems with personally, between the door thing and Hoffman repeatedly telling him that his obsession wasn't healthy with saving everyone. I think it's a really nice twist, honestly, to reveal Hoffman as a new apprentice, which they explain his origin in 5. I think it works really well. The way Matthews dies is a little over the top, to be honest. It is funny though. I mean, it's an entertaining way to go. Yeah, I really like the way that it all ties into the start and end, and it ties into the general theme of not being able to save everyone. His obsession to save everyone got everyone killed, and they all could have walked away if Rigg hadn't been a moron, essentially. Overall, I think 4 is much stronger. They actually do tone down the color grading a fair amount in this one. There is moments where they still do the color grading. There is one moment during Jigsaw's autopsy at the start and end, they use a really heavy grayscale color shading, but they leave the blood red. I think they even redden the blood. I think that looks kind of cool. It is a little... The grayscale doesn't look perfect. It makes everything look kind of chalky because it's applied to everything. I do like the contrast between the blood and the kind of grayscale, semi-grayscale that they have going on in that scene. Like I said, good ending, good twist. Hello Zep is used properly, but the rest of the music is used properly, as in it's used in that final scene. Kind of works. The rest of the music, as it tends to be, fairly generic. Also, I want to touch on Jigsaw's backstory scenes. There's a lot of flashbacks for Jigsaw that go in depth about him. Even though this isn't the first time his wife is introduced, I believe she briefly appears in 3, I know, and she might in 2. A big part of Jigsaw's motivation before getting cancer is his wife ran like a methadone clinic or some sort of rehab clinic, and one of her patients accidentally miscarried John and her child, which is what caused like his distrust of people, led to the first trap. I do kind of like seeing the origin, like his very first trap he has a personal reason for making, which is like, I mean, as good an origin as any to kind of get into that world. They also expand, I don't know if it was mentioned, it is briefly mentioned I believe, but they expand on him being like a civil engineer, and they also, through the interviews, you kind of get the sense that his wife knew what was going on and just kind of like turned the other way, or like was even somewhat supportive of it. The trap he puts the junkie guy in is pretty lame, but I guess you'd kind of expect that. He's in a chair and he has to push his face against knives to get out, and then after that he still tries to go after Jigsaw, and Jigsaw just like sidesteps. He's just like whoop, and the guy just tumbles into like some barbed wire and dies. But I think the expansion of Jigsaw's backstory, it's kind of odd to put it at this point in the story where he's like dead and his legacy's being passed on to other people, but I do somewhat like the direction they took it. I do think the scene where he's hunting the guy down is kind of hilarious because it's supposed to be like some Chinese culture festival thing, which is why the pig motif, the pig masks that his followers wear, comes from that, because he picks up a pig mask off like a table, but the entire for budgetary reasons, the entire festival is like, there's like 2 parallel shipping containers like this, and the whole festival's in there, and it's just like 20 Asian people walking around, and then Jigsaw and the guy. It's a little silly, but overall, Saw 4 I enjoy a lot. Certainly not top tier for me. As far as ranking the movies so far, I'd have to say this one is probably about on the same level as 2, so it's probably 1, and then 2 and 4, followed by 3. I do not like 3. 3's a lot lower.
Hello. Do you want to play a game?
Guys wanting Hoffman back forgot the fact that the bathroom door on the outside door can be locked, and guess who had access to the keys? That's right, only John and Gordon did, because remember, John didn't fully trust Amanda after Saw 2, hence the reason why Eric was able to escape the bathroom, because the door wasn't locked. That's why she was tested again in Saw 3, and we all saw what happened there. John at that time already entrusted Gordon the keys to that bathroom door, more than likely, because John predicted the possibility of his own death. The tape inside John's gut, Saw 4, showed that he didn't fully trust Hoffman and warned him someone was watching him with his M.O. That someone was Gordon. So with that being said, safe to say Hoffman is rotting in the same room with Adam by now. Be funny if they made a 2-hour movie about him in that room for 33 days signing the Saw theme song to himself. Going crazy, saying he should have banged Jill before that trap was even set on her XD. I know I would have started by taking off her shoes and socks to set the mode Doyalal with her big old titties flopping around.
Saw 5 is an odd one. Saw 5 starts the Hoffman trilogy. Our main antagonist shifts over to Detective Hoffman, who is one of Jigsaw's apprentices. He is a police officer who is indoctrinated into Jigsaw's cult thing. Hoffman plays by the rules a little differently from Jigsaw, where he's a little less forgiving than Jigsaw. He's pretty willing to kind of just murder people. The Hoffman trilogy as a whole, a lot of focus, despite him being the villain, is placed on Hoffman, to the point where in this movie he's almost like a protagonist, which is weird to say. He's certainly not a good person, even in like the anti-hero kind of, like there are lots of movies about where our protagonists are bad people, like The Godfather and stuff like that. The Sopranos is a TV show, but it's the same idea. Hoffman, for the most part, is the main character in this trilogy, despite that, which is an odd tonal shift. The movie's genre is odd, so I think I'll give a little plot rundown. There's basically 2 halves to the story. One half matters a hell of a lot less than the other. I feel like they were mandated by the nature of the franchise to put in the B-plot. I'll actually run through the B-plot first because it's pretty simple, but basically the B-plot to the movie is 6 people are put in a trap. They're all tied together in a certain way. That's kind of a spoiler, so I'll save it for the spoiler section. They're in traps which are somewhat cooperative, and basically, you know, Hoffman set up this trap, but it doesn't really have anything to do with the A-plot of the movie, outside of the fact that Hoffman is the one who, like, made the trap. The traps themselves, they're okay. I mean, there's a little bit more to it, so I'll talk about the traps in the spoiler section. There's a certain thing about them. I think that thing is a little bit obvious, but it is kind of played off as a twist, so I'll save it for a second. The A-plot of the movie, Hoffman has kind of taken over as Jigsaw, so he's in charge now. Hoffman is a little different. The movie opens with Hoffman's first trap, which he actually made unaffiliated from Jigsaw. He created a fake Jigsaw trap to kill his sister's murderer, but unlike Jigsaw's traps, it was an unwinnable trap. So he made it specifically both to 100% kill this guy. And also just to, pin it on Jigsaw. Everyone's like, oh, this is Jigsaw. So they don't look into him at all. He's actually the lead detective on the Jigsaw case, so he's the one who's supposed to be chasing down Jigsaw. Jigsaw sees his work and is somewhat impressed, so he offers Hoffman a chance to learn what Jigsaw's actually doing. As I've discussed, Jigsaw's intent is to rehabilitate people. He believes that by putting them in these traps, if they can survive, they'll come out better people. They're punished for their crimes and they learn from them. Jigsaw offers Hoffman the chance to learn from him and set up the real traps. And there's a lot of flashing back, as the series tends to do, to Jigsaw teaching Hoffman, telling him that if you set up the traps correctly, you can get inside people's minds and it's a mind game and this and that. And the whole time, an FBI agent who was also on the case, named Strom, suspects Hoffman because Hoffman gets out of the stuff that happens in Saw 3 and 4, which take place at the same time without getting injured, while the rest of his team is killed. Strom himself is heavily injured. Those are the two plots. They run concurrently to each other, I believe. It's a little iffy, the timeline on this one for me, but I think they happen roughly concurrently. The movie is an odd genre. The B plot is definitely just gore porn, as these movies so often get slammed for being. It really doesn't tie into the main plot. There's a little bit of a nice twist to it at the end, but it's still not really relevant. I think it's mostly there to fill time, which is unfortunate. Although I do like those sections. Even though the traps are a little weak in the spectacle department, they do have that theme that ties them together at the end that is moderately more interesting than a lot of the trap stuff that we get sometimes. As far as the Hoffman stuff goes, the Hoffman stuff is very strong. I think it's interesting to see. Hoffman feels like the protagonist in this one, which is odd. He's definitely he's the new Jigsaw, and he's kind of, he's murdering people technically. The most they could charge him with is kidnapping, but still kind of murder. A lot of it is kind of just, you learn a little bit about him and Jigsaw. He's pretty different from Jigsaw. Hoffman he's brutal, the Chad Hoffman. Even though Strom technically hasn't done anything wrong, he's doing his job. Hoffman thinks what he's doing is right, and Hoffman sees him as kind of an enemy, and because he's an enemy, he kind of pins Strom. He pins Strom as one of Jigsaw's apprentices to try to get the heat off him. And so it's interesting. It does bounce back and forth. There's Strom doing some detective work, but a lot of it truthfully follows Hoffman. And Hoffman, he's probably my favorite character in the franchise. Maybe that's bad to say, but Hoffman is just his actor, whose name is, he's played by Kostas Mandalor, so I wouldn't have remembered that anyway. But despite being, a serial killer, I think Hoffman is really endearing and fun, and there's something, it's almost kind of like a spy movie. I don't know if that's right. It has elements of a detective movie, but it's like a reverse detective movie, where he's faking evidence in order to make other people reach a conclusion. And the strong parts are kind of a detective movie, kind of a noir style thriller. If you cut out the B plot and found a way to if you disconnected it, it's tough to describe. If you cut out the B plot and you removed the Jigsaw connection, and it was just a serial killer cop, but the serial killer is the protagonist, it's almost it's an odd reverse detective noir vigilante film. I mean, if you didn't have him be a serial killer, it'd almost be a vigilante film, I suppose. It's odd. It's really unique. I know calling it unique like that makes it sound bad, but I truthfully do not think this is a bad movie. I think this might be my favorite Saw. And relatively, strangely enough, despite it coming after such important events in Saw 3 and 4, it almost feels standalone. I watched this as my first one in this marathon just because I like it. I was watching it with a friend. And it's fun to watch. It's not perfect, but there's something so endearing about Hoffman's character that it's just like, he's electric. His actor, his character, all that stuff is just like so magnetic almost. That despite everything, it's kind of like the best part of the movie. We're gonna move into spoilers. There's gonna be a timestamp here, somewhere, wherever I decided to put it. So you can skip ahead if you just want to hear my thoughts, my general thoughts about Saw 6. I'm going to talk about the Hoffman part first, since it is the main plot. Like I said, it's a bit of an odd duck. The B plot is basically filler in this movie. It pads out the running time to be feature length. The Hoffman part, there's not a lot to it. Strom catches on to him. He frames Strom to make the FBI believe that Strom is a Jigsaw apprentice so that he can continue killing without, like, anyone catching on to the fact that it's him, right? And it kind of goes back and forth in the background where he's, like, pinning things on Strom, planting that idea, and Strom is just, like, trying to figure it out. The big climax of the movie, basically the end result of that, but it's completely disconnected from the B-plot. The B-plot resolves before that. So, in the end, there's basically a second trap for Strom. The first trap, Strom is put into the water box at the start of the movie, and he pokes a hole in his own throat so that he can breathe in it. So this is Strom's second trap, but he's basically trying to eliminate Strom just so that he can, continue to do his stuff. Somehow, the theme of this is that Strom should trust Hoffman, which I don't think there's ever, like, Hoffman's basically like, you gotta trust me, I'm not a Jigsaw person, which is a lie. I guess maybe the lesson is supposed to be that Strom should have listened when Hoffman told him not to pursue him anymore, I guess. It's a little weak, but the glass coffin trap is one of my favorite moments in the series, despite the kind of janky logic to it. Effectively, Strom is lured into a room, and he's given a tape, and he's told that he should trust Hoffman and get in the glass coffin, it's a coffin filled with glass. Hoffman comes in, Strom does not trust him, and pushes him into the glass coffin. Afterwards, the glass coffin sinks beneath the floor of the room, and the room closes in and squishes Strom. On the B story side, I held off on talking about the traps just because there's a theme to them. I think it's a little obvious. The second one might be a little too blatant, but these 6 people, I believe it might be 5. I'm a little dumb. No, it's 6. Okay. At the end, the 6 people are all revealed to have been part of an arson, kind of. There's the building manager who made the shoddy building, the real estate agent who moved people into it, the guy investigating, the fire chief who took bribes to not arrest the junkie guy. The junkie guy was paid in heroin to burn the place down and was told it was empty when it wasn't. Stuff like that. But the idea behind the traps is kind of neat because they're all, the first one they're in, they have these ropes around their necks. And they have to get, there's 5 keys in boxes and there's 6 of them. They have to get the keys to unlock their neck thing so they don't get decapitated. One of them gets decapitated. The 5 that remain go to the next room, where there's a bunch of glass jars on the ceiling, and there are keys. And there's 4 keys, 4 sewer grates, and if they go in the sewer grates, they're safe from the bombs that explode after the time limit, which is a little ridiculous because the bombs probably would just go in and get sucked in, kind of roast everyone inside, but whatever. It's movie logic. And so they all kind of fight over the keys. 4 of them get in, 1 of them gets blown to pieces. Next up, there are 4 of them left. There's an electric bathtub. They have to conduct a current using 4 conductor things. And once they complete the circuit, the door opens before the bombs go off. They murder one of the people in the trap and have her hold on to they impale her with the things so that she gets electrocuted. The current runs through her. After it runs through her, the door opens up. Okay, no, I was wrong. There's 5. So just subtract one number from everything I said before, because I'm dumb. So, the last one, there's 2 left. It's only now that they realize they were supposed to work together the whole time, which is the big twist in the movie. I guess the glass coffin's a little bit of a twist, but the last trap, they have to stick their hands into like this razor blade, and once they collect 10 pints of blood, they can leave the room. The intention for all these traps was that there's ways for all of them to survive by working together. In the first trap, all the locks around their neck all use the same key, so they could have just shared keys to get out instead of letting one die. In the bomb room, they could have just shared the space in the pipes. I think that's kind of like the really obvious one that kind of gives it away, because like anyone, my friend hadn't seen the film before, hadn't seen Saw 5 before, and was wondering why they didn't just share the pipe. So really they only needed one key in the second trap. In the third one, the bathtub, they could have split the current and only suffered minor shocks instead of having to murder one of them just to like shove all the things into them. You know, they split the electricity so it doesn't hurt that bad, kind of like how you can like, you know, with those, I don't know, what are those shock things? That shock thing that was in the iDubbbz video where the current passes through so you don't get as much individually. But then for the fourth one, if all 6 of them, or if all 5 of them were alive, they'd only have to give up 2 pints of blood each instead of the 2 remaining survivors having to give up 5 each. So in the end, the last 2 give up 5 each. It's implied they survive. I don't remember if they actually do, but I guess that kind of wraps up the story and the spoilers. I do think this is a good movie. It's weird though. The plot structure is very, very bad. I mean, half the movie, probably more than half, the B plot probably takes up slightly more than half, is effectively filler. The B plot really doesn't connect to the A plot in any meaningful way. I mean, I think the B plot is fairly good, but the A plot's pretty slim. It's just like Detective Hoffman frames Strahm, and then at the end he kills Strahm. That's all there is to it. The guy who plays Hoffman, like I said before, magnetic. He's fantastic to watch. He's fun as fuck. I really like his character. Jigsaw, they tried to like play off like he was kind of a good guy where he's like trying to rehabilitate people. Hoffman just doesn't give a fuck, man. He does follow Jigsaw's rules after that first trap, kind of. Strahm really didn't do anything wrong except for his job. I think there's something kind of fun about like the brutalness of Hoffman, and it certainly gets more brutal as his little trilogy goes on. 5, 6, and 7 are all basically about him. But truthfully, it's kind of a mess because like I said, B plot entirely pointless. A plot good enough. Well, no, the A plot is good. The B plot's essentially worthless filler, although it is fun worthless filler. It's not the best as far as gore goes. It's not the best as far as like set pieces go. The B plot is okay. The A plot is really good, but it's like thin and spread out throughout the whole movie using the B plot as padding. But despite that, I just like Hoffman so much that it kind of makes up for it. As these movies tend to be, there's some other issues. I wouldn't say it's badly shot, although like a lot of the movies in this franchise, I don't think it's nearly as gaudy as some of the other movies. But Saw 5, they do quite a bit of color correcting to make it very kind of like gray-blue throughout. The flashbacks are pretty sparse in this one. Normally the series is just flooded with fucking flashbacks. Sometimes half the movie's fucking flashbacks, but there's only 3 or 4 here, mostly involving Jigsaw training Hoffman and initially recruiting him. But those are just covered in like disgusting, like, it's not even sepia. It's like semi-sepia. It's kind of yellowy. It looks pretty horrendous. A lot of the other stuff, I mean, these movies were kind of shot, not poorly, but they were basically coming out 1 a year for a time, so you can tell they were shot more for efficiency. There is some cool shots in this one. Real brief spoiler, so just cover your ears until the little thing here goes away. but the shot of Strom's arm getting crushed and also his hand gripping the top of the cage, okay, you can start listening again, are really cool. I think the whole glass coffin sequence comes together really nicely. A lot of the other stuff shot pretty basically. There's nothing much to say in the music department. Zepp's theme returns. This is actually my favorite version of the theme song, which is named Hello Zepp. Most of the music, it's pretty much generic background stuff. Hello Zepp returns as it does, being like the main motif of the series. Probably my favorite version of Hello Zepp, and its usage is fantastic. Again, that's tied into the glass coffin scene, which is just like level above everything else in this movie. The acting is fine. I mean, there's no one really stand out in the group of the people in the traps. The journalist guy maybe a little, I think he's fairly intense. He's supposed to be kind of an antagonistic force in the group, so he brings a little bit of intensity. As I said, Hoffman I love. Strom is fine, and Tobin Bell as Jigsaw when he does appear, which is entirely limited to flashbacks in this one. He's good. I like seeing him. He has an odd kind of old person charisma. And as far as it goes, it's tough to say. I mean, it is one of my favorites of the Saw movies, but it's tough to describe why. There's something about it that makes it really fun to watch. Even as a standalone, like it doesn't get bogged down with all the stuff that was going on beforehand. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and even 6 and 7 go really, really hard on like the flashbacks and like all this other stuff. Like 1 is basically half flashbacks. 3 and 4 take place at the same time, so you basically have to watch both. If you have like a basic knowledge of what the Saw franchise is about, I guess it'd be minor spoilers for 3 and 4. But they're also ancient movies anyway. You could potentially like start on this movie because it's like an origin story for Hoffman almost. It's like half origin story for Hoffman and half just like developing his character as like the supreme Chad. And you truthfully don't need like that much extra information about it, which makes it kind of interesting. The glass coffin stuff is fantastic. The premise is fun. There's a little bit of cluttered storytelling there, but on a relative scale for the Saw franchise, because it gets cluttered. They're cluttered movies. They can be complicated. Each movie takes place in like 7 different time periods. This is short and simple, fairly straightforward, and I think it kind of just becomes better than the sum of its parts, especially because you get to see Hoffman run around and he's just, I love him so much. So yeah, I think overall this one is fairly simple, straightforward. You don't need a whole lot of knowledge of the series, so you could potentially start on this one, and Hoffman is just such a joy to watch. So that kind of concludes my thoughts on Saw 5. So we will now transition into Saw 6.
Hello. Do you want to play a game?
I love this movie. Saw 6 is trash kino. When talking about Saw to people, I generally was rating Saw 6 pretty low for the longest time. Saw 6 is actually the first one I saw, I believe. Pretty sure. I think at the time it was just on Netflix, and it just happened to be the one. But man, this movie is a fucking riot. I loved it. I loved rewatching it. The plot, you're looking at 2 stories. One is Hoffman is still being a guy Chad, still being the best character, even better in this one. And that's the B plot. There's also some stuff with Jill, John's ex-wife. I don't know. As well as some more backstory stuff. I'll get into that in a moment. And then the A plot is there's a bunch of insurance people who are put into a trap because they denied Jigsaw coverage, and they're basically just douchey insurance people. And for that they deserve to die or get horribly mutilated. The head of the insurance agency is put through a long series of tests where he has to save his employees. The movie starts, well, his part of the movie, there's a part of the movie, there's an intro where there's the pound of flesh, which was a pretty infamous scene at the time, where 2 people have to cut off their body parts, and whoever cuts off more lives, basically. I remember that one being controversial at the time it came out. It has no relevance to the plot, literally almost zero. After the girl survives, Hoffman interviews her in the hospital. That's it. You know, that is what happens. It's literally only there. It's just like the big edgy opening scene. So the insurance guy, William Easton. This one is hilarious. William and this old guy, who is said to be a lifelong smoker, put in a machine where every time they take a breath, the things close in on their chest until they die. And so all he has to do is hold his breath longer than this old man, which is supremely unfair. And I'm pretty sure the only thing that the old guy did wrong was smoke. This scene is one of the funniest in the movie. There's so much shit. I mean, the concept alone is horrendous. Not in like a shocking way, but in like, this is so dumb. But the scene, at one point, I'll try to find the clip, but at one point in this scene, the audio like partially cuts out. It doesn't cut out, but it like drops in volume, like it's really badly mixed. And at one point, when the old guy gets crushed a little bit, he takes a breath. There's an extreme close-up of him pissing his pants. I actually had to back it up to watch it again because I was laughing so hard I couldn't see what happened after. William obviously survives because he's the protagonist, even though Hoffman is more so. But we're going to talk about Hoffman because that's the real story here. The next trap is the Hangman. It's pretty simple. There's two people who they have barbed wire nooses around their necks. I'm not making this up. This movie is so ridiculous, and it only gets dumber, and I love it. I love it. And he basically just has to choose which one dies. That's it. It's supposed to teach him a lesson of empathy, not letting people die because you're a moderately scummy insurance man, I guess. That one's whatever. The next one is like the steam maze. I don't know what they're officially called, but he has to help guide one of his co-workers through a steam maze, and also in order for her to get through, he has to take some of the steam himself by flipping switches. You know, concept pretty good, kind of cool. I do wonder though, every time he pulls these switches, it's like a steam valve comes out of a pipe. If he situated himself better, he could take a lot less damage than leaning his face straight into it. At the end, it's revealed, at the end of that trap, it's revealed that the key to she has like a timer on her, and if she doesn't get through, it puts a spike in her head or something, kills her. He has the key in his body. It's like, what's this called? It's like by his kidney or something. I don't know what side the kidney's on. She grabs a buzzsaw and tries to cut it out of him, and so they get in a fist fight, and he just decks her in the face a couple of times while dodging her buzzsaw that she's just swinging around wildly. Eventually she ends up dying because the timer runs out. And his last big trap is the shotgun carousel is absolutely ridiculous. He basically has to choose two people who die. There's 6 shots in the shotgun for some reason. The carousel spins, and when it lands on someone, he has the option to save them by drilling a hole in his hand. It's pretty ridiculous. The real great part about it is the end. He ends up saving 2 people, who cares? But he saves the second from the last person. The final guy has to sit there and go around the wheel waiting for his inevitable shotgun blast to the face. And the whole time he's screaming, he's like, "Look at me while you kill me! You killing me! This is all your fault, I hate you!" And he's just like hamming it up so fucking hard. Oh my god, it is so fucking funny. It's supposed to be like tragic and heartbreaking, but it is so funny. He is such a bad actor and he looks like such a dweeb. It's just, oh my god, it is ridiculous. And I'll save the end of that plot line for a minute. Hoffman is so great in this movie. I love him so much. He is the best character. And this one, he's kind of just like being investigated for most of it. There are a couple flashback sequences where we learn a little more about Jigsaw. Mostly Jigsaw, he has this speech to the insurance guy at the start, who is his insurance provider, where he rants about how insurance companies choose who lives and dies. And it's so awkward. It's like just minutes long, and he's like, the insurance companies are the ones who decide who lives and dies, and it's not the politicians, it's all the insurance companies. And he's going all out on the hamming it up, and oh my god. Oh my god. It is funny. We finally get to find out what's in Amanda's letter, which is something I forgot to mention in 3 and 4. In 3, Amanda reads a letter, and we don't know the contents of it or anything about it really. It's never explained in that movie. In 4, we see it was Hoffman who placed the letter. It's never explained in 4 either. In this one, we finally find out what the letter says. Hoffman wrote it to Amanda. Hoffman somehow found out that Amanda was the girlfriend of the guy who caused Jill Tuck to miscarry, the drug guy, and she was there that night and convinced him to do it. And Hoffman somehow found this out. I don't know how. And Jigsaw did not know this. And Hoffman rigged her game. The letter says, I'll tell Jigsaw that you were a participant in his unborn kid dying if you don't shoot Lynn, who's the woman who performs brain surgery on John. At the end of Saw 4, Strom makes his way to the place where Saw 3 mostly took place, and the main character from that movie, Jeff, is locked in the room with Amanda and Lynn and John's bodies. And Strom gets there, and Strom ends up shooting Jeff because Jeff pulls a gun on him because Jigsaw's thing said, I don't know. Basically, it's kind of like the way that 3 and 4 just like tie themselves together, and that leads into Strom's role in 5 where he starts with the pen in his throat. But yeah, that's the reason why Amanda kind of acted like a dumbass and killed Lynn. It wasn't for no reason, and it wasn't just because she's stupid, it's because she was forced to, which is what ended up getting everyone killed at the end of Saw 3 and partially at the end of 4. After the flashbacks, most of the Hoffman plot in this movie is him just fucking shit up. He becomes a slasher villain in this movie, essentially. He's like Jason Voorhees, the Greek Jason Voorhees. At the start, he takes Strom's hand, which was cut off during the glass coffin trap, and he's using it to place fingerprints at crime scenes to frame Strom. Strom's partner, as well as a new investigator, are looking into the murders now too. And so he's carrying Strom's hand around and placing fingerprints everywhere. Towards the end, he just goes full slasher. Maybe the best scene in the movie. They find a voice recording, a Jigsaw voice recording. Obviously John's dead, so he didn't record it. It was recorded using a modulator by Hoffman. And they reversed the modulation off of the voice, which reveals it to be Hoffman. And the second it does, he slits the throat of the male cop, throws hot coffee in the female cop's face, stabs a knife into the electric outlet to blow out the power, grabs the computer scientist lady, and then the female cop tries to shoot him and ends up shooting her multiple times. Then he runs up and stabs and slashes her throat. And it's like, he is just full on slasher villain at this point. He gives no fucks. And it is so entertaining. And then he goes to his car and he has Strom's hand in his trunk in a plastic bag, and he just pulls it out and starts planting fingerprints everywhere and burns the place down. Hoffman is such a ridiculous character. It's so great. He is just a pure evil slasher villain. Apparently they tried to get Dr. Gordon to come back, which did not work out. But also, the original plan for this movie was to have Hoffman go up against the Mafia for some reason, which is... I wish we had gotten that. As for the spoiler section, there's not a whole lot to say. Jill is shown a few times. She's carrying out John's last will, and John's last target is Hoffman. So she ends up putting a reverse bear trap on Hoffman. He jams it into the metal bars of a door that he's near, and he's able to wiggle it off. He rips off his entire cheek doing it. He manages to get out of it. It's an intense scene. You think he's gonna die. You think best boy is gonna die, but he never gives up. He never dies. That's a really fun scene. The other story, the insurance agent finally gets to the end of his little journey. Throughout the movie, you see this mother and son in a cell with a bunch of hydrochloric acid or some sort of acid, and there's a switch near them that says live or die on it. And when he gets back there, they watch him go through all these tests, and when he gets over there, they have to decide if they forgive him for killing people by not giving them insurance. You know, the kid murders him. The kid melts his ass with a bunch of needles full of acid just pumped straight into him. It's an odd ending. There's no real thought put into the fact that the kid just murders someone out of petty rage for business dealing, but you know, it happens. The movie's slightly better shot than the others. The effects and gore tend to be the best parts of these movies. I mean, even in the ones that I've said looked bad, it generally tends to be decent looking in the gore shots. This one, color correction is still an issue. The flashbacks have a lot of gray, but certainly less than Saw 4 had. They do mix up the color correction a little bit. There's still a lot of green, but the steam room scene has a lot of red and orange in it, which is actually kind of cool looking. Not fantastic, but I do think it works, and it's definitely a nice change of pace from the green. And again, the music is passable, whatever. They got the usage of Hello Zepp right again. This movie is essentially trash Kino. It's a terrible movie. I mean, it's stupid as hell. It's awkward. The acting is terrible. But it is just such a joy. Hoffman is such a joy whenever he's on screen. When he's murdering those other cops, it's so fucking... You get ecstatic. You like the guy. He's hard not to like. He's the fucking... He's like Rocky Balboa if Rocky Balboa was a slasher villain. He brings so much to the series in his own unique, awkward way. And truthfully, the insurance guy's plotline is kind of rehashy. It's nothing too special. It retreads a lot of what 3 did with the whole having to save other people. This time the other people don't deserve death, which is part of the lesson that John was trying to teach the guy, but it's overall like the same idea most of the way through, where it's like he has to save other people at minimal risk to himself. He does take a little bit of damage, but relatively nothing too severe. And then at the end, they kind of cop it out by having him just get fucking got by the kid. So it's not perfect. I mean, I certainly don't think I'd call it good by normal measures, but it's enjoyable. It's really fun to watch. Hoffman is the best thing that this franchise has by a fucking mile, and making him the main character more or less was such a good idea, because I cannot get enough of the guy. So yeah, it's a little bit of a simpler movie than 3 and 4 were, especially because that was a mess. But Saw 5 I like a lot, but it's mostly just the Hoffman parts that I liked so much, where the A plot is a little meh. And this one has kind of the same stuff. I think the Hoffman stuff is still really good, maybe even better than in Saw 5, but I think the A plot with the insurance guy, despite how ridiculous and funny it is, isn't really as well pulled off as Saw 5. Saw 5 is a little more unique instead of being like a retread of 3 and 4. So overall, it's okay. Current ranking, I'm gonna say, off the top of my head, I'm gonna go 1, 5, 6, 2 and 4, and then 3 on the bottom. So we will do Saw 3D, aka Saw the Final Chapter, aka Saw 7.
Hello. Do you want to play a game?
Okay, now we move on to Saw the Final Chapter. For a while this was the final chapter, although the name ended up being a bit presumptuous. Just like Friday the 13th, the final chapter. They ended up making more eventually because this movie was successful. Ended up making Jigsaw, which granted they did wait roughly a decade. Whereas Friday the 13th came back the next year or 2 years later, something like that. Originally the plan was to end on 8, and after 6 moderately underperformed, they crushed 7 and 8 together into this. This movie was also formerly known as Saw 3D. When it was released in theaters, it had the 3D gimmick going on. Not a big fan of 3D. Have not seen this in 3D. It is still available. Vudu has it available on 3D for 3D TVs. You can tell where the 3D elements are in this movie, and they don't look like they enhance much, and they also generally look kind of bad. This movie as a whole looks pretty bad. It's shot pretty sitcom-y. The coloration is just horrendous. I'm not sure if it's due to limitations working with 3D cameras or what exactly, but everything is really brightly lit and sitcom-y. The blood is pink in this movie, like bright pink. It generally looks pretty horrendous. Even as far as these movies go, it looks pretty horrendous. The plot is a mess, as there tends to be. There's 2 plots. The first plot is everyone's on to Hoffman. Jill goes to the police station, Jill Tuck, to basically rat on Hoffman. So she sits around in police custody and Hoffman tries to kill her. That plot probably takes up roughly 15 minutes of the movie, maybe 20. It's pretty short. There's a couple random scenes with almost no relevance. The movie opens up on 2 guys and their girlfriend who is fucking them both, but they don't know it, and they have to decide which one of the 3 dies. They team up and cut the girlfriend in half. It's a funny scene. It's something, but it doesn't really tie into the story at all. Supposedly the 2 Jigsaw henchmen at the end of the movie are the characters from this scene, but they're never unmasked or shown or have any real plot relevance. So who cares? The other one is the neo-Nazi car scene, which is funny. It's the most elaborate trap in the Saw franchise, where there's a guy who's glued to a car seat in a car garage on a car that's jacked up, and the car's jacked up above a neo-Nazi girl's head, and there's a guy with his body chained to the car, like his limbs and face, and then there's a guy tied to the door, and the guy's supposed to rip all his back skin off because it's like magical glued onto the seat, like the most powerful glue, just the best glue. And he fails to do it, so he rips all his skin off, and the gas pedal is taped down or something, and the brake lines are cut, and so it falls, and it crushes the head of the girl, and then it starts driving, and the guy who's chained to it gets ripped to pieces, and then it drives into the other guy and crushes him, and then it crashes into another car and flings out the guy in the car. And that's what this movie is. More than anything, it's an excuse for gore. That does tie in a little bit. It's how Hoffman gets into the police station by pretending to be a body in a body bag, because the police didn't double check or anything before they hauled the bodies. The other part of this story is the Bobby Dagan story. Bobby pretends to be a Jigsaw survivor and goes on like talk shows and writes a book, and his wife doesn't know that he's lying about it, but he gets a bunch of money and fame for pretending to be a Jigsaw survivor. There's a really funny scene that takes place, I guess it has to be like before Saw 2 maybe? I don't know how long he's been doing this, but Jigsaw shows up to Bobby's book signing dressed as Fred Durst. It's really funny. Oh my god. Oh my god. Bobby gets put in traps. He's got the kind of one where he's got it's one of those save other people traps. He starts out, he's in a cage and he has to swing from the cage to get out. Dodge spikes. His press publicist is in a chair, and every time she makes a noise, these spikes get closer to her, and also if 60 seconds pass, the spikes get closer, and then they stab her in the throat and kill her. And to save her, Bobby has to yank a key on a fish hook out of her stomach through her mouth. The scene itself is whatever, but the amount of shit that comes out when he pulls that hook up is horrendous. It's a very unpleasant scene, to say the least, even by Saw standards. Then there's a girl who he has to lift up a thing that pokes him in the sides to get a girl out from having spikes shoved in her face. They did the spikes a lot in this one. They were really feeling the spikes. Then his best friend has to navigate him through like a maze while he's blindfolded. And if he falls, he gets hanged, and Bobby has to throw him the key so that he can take the noose off in time. Bobby fails all these things. He's really stupid. And then, in order to get the combination to the door where his wife is, because she's being held hostage, she doesn't know he's a liar, because he's just a shitty person like that. He has to rip out his wisdom teeth to get the combination. That one's pretty unpleasant. I don't like the teeth stuff. That's a little gross to me. And then his final challenge, the story he made up when he was telling everyone he was a Jigsaw survivor, was that he had to put hooks in his chest and then climb some chains to do a thing. And Jigsaw was like, hey, now you gotta do that thing for real. And so he puts the hooks in, and he climbs the chain. If he doesn't do it in time, his wife gets put in a gigantic oven and roasted alive for the crime of being married to someone who lied to her. Apparently this was Jigsaw's trap, even though no one bothered to execute it for like 5 years. I don't know who made this trap. It wasn't Jigsaw, because he's dead. John. So it either had to be Hoffman or the character who's the big reveal at the end of the movie. And I guess that character does show up at the Jigsaw Survivor Group meeting for a second, which might point to it being him, but when he gets the package from Jigsaw, it's implied that he just has to do one thing, which is the end of the movie. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure who administered this and why it would turn out this way, because I don't feels a little off from Jigsaw's typical moral code to roast a woman alive for nothing, but I guess he also did it with Lynn in Saw 3, so what do I know? The spoilers, they're really brief. Hoffman goes to the police station. He kills John's wife, Jill. And then Dr. Gordon, the main character of the first movie, who they tried to get back for literally every single movie, captures Hoffman and locks him in the bathroom. According to the directors, this kills the Hoffman. I have a hard time believing that, considering he's Hoffman. A lot of people have survived the bathroom. Dr. Gordon by cutting off his own foot, but also Donnie Wahlberg was able to just break his own foot and slip it out using a fucking toilet seat. I think if anyone would fucking rip their own fucking leg off or smash it to pieces to get out, it'd be Hoffman. I have a tough time believing that he died, but that's apparently what happened, so. And yeah, this was supposed to be the conclusion of the series for a while. Jigsaw eventually did come out. It's not as strongly tied to these other movies as these last 7 have been. The series is really reverential for itself. Really likes revisiting characters and ideas from earlier movies, sets, traps even. This movie's got, once again, the reverse bear trap, which was so iconic that they had to stick it in every movie, but yet another return to the bathroom, as I said. I'm pretty sure the only movie that the bathroom doesn't appear in any way is Saw 4, if I remember correctly. God, this movie is horrendous. It walks the fine line. It definitely surpasses the first trash barrier Sometimes it slips into trash kino, but sometimes it goes too far and just slips back into being trash, which is, not optimal. It can be a rough watch at times. I mean, I laughed a lot. I did think it was funny, but it was, oh man, it is a horrendous movie, as I've touched on. Lighting, generally horrendous. Pretty much every aspect of the production design is terrible. Pink blood, just like, the traps are good, and you can tell that they blew a lot of money on the 3D, because they throw the 3D effect in all the time, but it's just like random crap. It's like someone dies and their guts fly towards the screen, stuff like that. It's just like huge fucking eye roll. The 3D really does not help this movie when it's already so ugly. Acting is mostly fine. Dr. Gordon actually doesn't do a very good job, which is funny considering this is his big grand return. I still love Hoffman. Hoffman goes full Terminator in this movie. He kills the entire fucking police station. I love that moment. I love Hoffman. I find Hoffman a very enjoyable character, especially when he's going full fucking slasher villain. For the most part, the movie is just kind of horrendous. Not in a Saw 6 way where it's like charming and fun and stupid and weird and energetic, but more like it's pretty dull most of the time. The traps aren't that exciting. I've highlighted most of them. There's a couple others that are shown like flashbacks, but it's like two people hang from a metal bar and knock each other into lawnmowers. 3D effects are terrible. The shooting, production design, most of the stuff in this movie just looks horrendous. Acting is choppy all around as it tends to be. I think Bobby's fine. John Kramer's in the movie for like 4 seconds, so whatever. Hoffman is good as always. Jill is terrible in this movie. And also special shoutouts to the new detective guy, the one who interrogates Jill, and he's kind of like the protagonist through the movie besides Bobby for the A plot, I guess. Horrendous actor. The movie overall is painful. It's far less fun than Saw 6. It's funny to watch, but kind of more like in like the 70s B-movie kind of way, where it's really boring and you kind of gotta fill in the gaps by just mocking how bad it is, like how badly it's made, rather than kind of laughing along with the absurdity of it. So Saw 3D, I do not like.
Hello. Do you want to play a game?
Jigsaw is currently the newest entry in the Saw franchise. Spiral was delayed for obvious reasons, so unfortunately that won't be a part of this retrospective. For the time being, Jigsaw is our final entry. Final entry in the timeline, and final entry we'll be getting until October at best. So, Jigsaw's plot is pretty simple. It takes place in 2016, I think. It's pretty vague. I think the original ones take place in like 2004 when the series started, and everything in the first couple movies takes place over the course of a year or two, something like that. So not that long, as you'd come to expect. There's an A and a B plot. A plot is a group of investigators are looking into bodies that are showing up around town that have been in jigsaw traps, trying to find Jigsaw. And there's questions as to who's behind it. Since, John Kramer is dead, there's the implication tossed around that John Kramer might still be alive. There is, for whatever reason, no mention of Gordon, even though Gordon is alive. Presumably, Hoffman has died, according to the director of Saw 3D, which is probably why they didn't consider him. Although, I don't know if they know he was alive or dead. Whereas I guess they may not know Gordon was involved at all. The B-plot is, of course, mostly unconnected series of traps. The traps are another group-based affair, although it's more just like a bunch of people are stuck together with their own individual traps in place. Well, it starts with a guy who has a button that he has to press to start the game, And this trap is just there basically to signify to the police that there's a game on, that Jigsaw's back. There is the buzzsaw trap where a bunch of people are dragged by chains towards buzzsaws and they have to cut themselves to get out. It seems weird. One of the people in the trap is asleep. He was drugged too much and doesn't wake up. But when he cuts himself on the thing at the end, it doesn't automatically turn off. Instead, it tears him to pieces. Seems a touch convenient. They move on to one where a girl has to inject herself with a needle. One of them has nothing in it and two of them have acid. And she has to figure out which one has meaning to her. Otherwise, everyone gets hung. This is where we're really introduced to our characters. Unlike a lot of times in this series, the people in the traps, they try to give some characterization. I wouldn't say it's done well. There's Carly, and she is a purse robber. That's kind of all we know about her. She dies first, so. The one that's really obnoxious, the other guy and girl are pretty much blank slates, although we do learn about their crimes in a little more detail than usually. Ryan is the one I don't like. He's pretty quippy. I guess that's what the modern sensibility is. Quips and stuff like that. He's pretty obnoxious, don't care for him. They move on. Ryan gets his leg stuck in a wire and he has to pull a switch to chop off the bottom of his leg to get out, but also to free the other two from a grain silo that fills with grain and then starts dropping like tools on them. And luckily they don't get hit. Everyone gets out. A-okay. And they move on to the next one, which is a gigantic spinning razor. I don't know how someone would construct something like that, but the guy is hung by his foot and has to reach down and press a brake to stop it from spinning, otherwise it'll tear him to shreds. The effects on that one are very bad. It basically looks like a bad CGI overlay, which it is. And him getting spun around and the blood splatter, it comes off pretty, they should have used just like gallons of real blood and shot it everywhere. Made some big plastic spinning thing to just launch it around, but that one looks a little iffy. Not that that's really important to the plot. Then on the cop end, you got a somewhat corrupt cop who takes the law into his own hand named Detective Halloran, who is researching this new jigsaw thing with his partner, who's pretty unimportant. You have Logan and Eleanor, who are forensic investigators. They work with the bodies. Logan was in the war, and he's a little shaken up about that, and his wife was murdered. And Eleanor is a Jigsaw fangirl, a jigaboo. I don't think I can keep that one in. She's a Jigsaw boo, and they're all on the Jigsaw case. So moving into spoilers, you got at the end the two remaining, Anna and Ryan, are trapped in a room. Jigsaw talks to him for a while and there's a shotgun between them. The keys to release themselves are inside the shotgun. Anna tries to fire it because she believes that she's supposed to kill Ryan to get out. And it's designed to backfire, so it kills her. But since the keys are inside, they're also destroyed, and Ryan eventually dies of starvation. But the big twist is that all of this happened sometime before Saw 1. This is actually an elaborate recreation, almost an identical one-to-one recreation of Jigsaw's first set of traps, which nobody knew about or discovered, located on a farm. All the people dying that we saw throughout the movie were actually dead for a little over 10 years in the story of the movie. It turns out that Logan had secretly recreated the trap. He was one of the participants in the original trap. He was the one who didn't wake up, and Jigsaw felt bad about him dying outside of his control, and also felt bad about him being in the trap for accidentally mixing up labels on a x-ray, which caused John's cancer to not get diagnosed correctly. So Jigsaw saves him and takes Logan in as one of his many apprentices. And then Logan perfectly recreated everything with criminals that Halloran had let go. Pretty contrived. And I know this is a little nitpicky, but the movie also lies to you about this twist. What I mean primarily is, in one of the scenes, the people who are in the trap get a message from Jigsaw on a TV, and that message is delivered through a flat screen, high resolution flat screen that's wall mounted. Those weren't particularly common in 2004 when this would have taken place, 2003 or 2004. Besides the fact that throughout the rest of the series, everything is delivered on like these crappy CRT VHS TVs. So the movie is lying to you about the twist, which feels a little like cheating, especially because you can kind of just hand wave it by like saying whoever made the trap wanted it to be authentic and use the same kind of equipment that Jigsaw did, alongside like the fact that it's far easier to track the purchase of a modern day TV if the police were to find that TV than it is to like track down some ancient CRT relic to who purchased it. So Logan basically wanted to lure Halloran into the barn where the original trap had taken place and where the new traps were taking place. Logan takes Eleanor under the pretense of investigating it and frames Halloran before killing him. And again, getting a little nitpicky, but Logan kind of just kills Halloran out of revenge. Kills a couple people out of revenge. The guy from the start of the movie, who Halloran kept out of jail because he was an informant, was the guy who murdered Logan's wife, and Logan personally shot him with a sniper rifle just so that he couldn't squeal because he didn't have like a better plan or a bomb or anything. Just kind of cheated his own game. And then at the end he ends up executing Halloran with the laser trap, which is they're forced to Logan and Halloran are put in collars that have these laser things. They're like, you see one earlier in the movie and it's like he's using it as like, it's like a surgical laser thing. So I don't know why the Saw universe has these lasers in it when real world doesn't, but they have to confess what they did wrong while in their laser necklaces, otherwise it'll slice them. Halloran confesses to being a dirty cop and letting innocent people die, but Logan still ends up using the laser on him, which again, it's another person going against Jones' philosophy. But also, when Halloran gets lasered, his head like peels apart like a flower, which is kind of a cool visual, I suppose, but at the same time, your skull's pretty hard. It wouldn't just like split apart like that. Your skull would be pretty well intact and solid, unless the laser like liquefied his skull at the same time. But if that was the case, it'd be a pretty useless piece of surgical equipment. So I don't know. I already covered all the traps. I think for the most part they're okay. A little bland. I think everything about this movie's a little bit bland. They shoot this like a modern movie, like it doesn't have all the green color grading and all that, which does make it a lot more palatable to watch at times than like Saw 3D. But at the same time, it looks like a generic modern movie where like part of the aesthetic of the series was how like dirty and grimy everything came off looking. You think back to like the bathroom in Saw 1, and it's got the film grain and there's like slime and muck and everything just looks kind of like shitty and grimy and dirty, and that carries through to a lot of the original 7, some better than others. But this movie does have a tendency to look a little too clean and has some of the other modern issues. Like I said, Ryan is kind of quippy and jokey, which I don't like at all. It doesn't feel fitting to the series. I mean, the series could definitely be funny, but I don't think it was trying to be most of the time it was. As far as it goes, they tried a soft reboot, so they cut most of the ties with the rest of the series. John does appear in small doses, maybe 3 or 4 minutes overall, but no other characters do. Gordon is presumably alive. Hoffman, I mean, they claim he's dead, but... And there's no mention of other important characters who we know are dead, which... Fair enough. This is the only movie besides Saw 4 that doesn't feature the bathroom in any capacity. And for a series so reverential, like every single movie after the first one has like segments that are like placed during other movies. 3 and 4 take place at the same time. They're always coming back to the bathroom, reverse bear traps. These elements that are like so core to the series, always stuck around in the series. Like, they're always coming back. And this movie abandons almost all of them except for John Kramer, and even then they're pretty light on that. So I don't know, it feels a little hollow. It's also a little rehashy in the plot department. This is more or less like Saw 5, where you have like the completely disconnected group story, and then the main character's trying to frame a cop as the Jigsaw killer. In Saw 5, we knew Hoffman was Jigsaw from the start, and in this movie, they try to throw you off. I still think there's pretty much 4 options in the movie for who it could be. Eleanor, they tried too hard to make a red herring by making her like a jigaboo, to the point where you're like, it'd be almost too obvious if she was it. The dirty cop is a possibility, but also Hoffman was already a dirty cop Jigsaw clone, and we don't see nearly enough of him for it to be like, it just doesn't, he comes off as like too douchey and stupid. There's his partner who's borderline a featured extra. I mean, he does not have a lot going on. Through process of elimination, I think most people could probably at least get into the fucking mindset that it's probably Logan. It's also unclear whether or not they're actually going to carry on with this storyline. They definitely leave it open to sequels. We see Eleanor gets away to be Logan's alibi. Logan is still alive, so they could definitely keep doing it, although Spiral indicates that they probably won't. I mean, Jigsaw came out 4 years ago now, and Spiral is another reboot that apparently doesn't have anyone from past movies. I do imagine that John Kramer will have some kind of cameo just because it's in the Saw franchise, but it seems even more disconnected from the main series than this one does, to the point where it almost feels like a Cloverfield situation. Like, they purchased the rights to some movie about a serial killer and they're like, oh, we could market this as kind of a Saw movie, stick it in there, even though it's just disconnected. Granted, I think John Kramer will show up, but Spiral seems to indicate that they're abandoning the Jigsaw stuff for now. Considering it's been 4 years, I don't find it incredibly likely that we'll return to this Jigsaw plotline. So I don't think we'll see more Logan or Eleanor anytime soon. So for the time being, this is effectively the end of the franchise. Spiral's pretty much a pure spin-off, and it's pretty unclear whether or not we'll see more. As much as I didn't particularly like Saw 3D, it attempted to wrap up all the loose ends by killing Jill, killing Hoffman. John's dead, Amanda's dead. The only one alive is Dr. Gordon. He doesn't seem to be actively continuing Jigsaw's work in any way. So I think it's safe to say that this is probably the end, which is a little disappointing. It doesn't really tie in with the rest of the movies. It's kind of just like an afterthought. Most of the plot lines from the original 7 are basically tied up, and this was their attempt at doing yet another Hollywood soft reboot where they take a series and remake a movie and stick some new names on it and try to see if it'll work again. And apparently it was a failed experiment. Otherwise, I imagine we'd be at probably Jigsaw 3 by now. It doesn't feel like an ending. It feels kind of like a new beginning that just kind of suddenly stops. It's not great. It's pretty bland, and they definitely should have gotten grittier with it, I think. It's tough to say, because like Saw 7 kind of just nailed everything shut pretty definitively, and then this one they're like, oh, well, there's another apprentice, and he was just hanging out, being a cop, doing nothing. Even Dr. Gordon didn't know about him, apparently. Jigsaw wasn't concerned enough to have him killed when he was having Hoffman killed. It's all a little contrived. It doesn't particularly work. I think it's kind of a weak and disappointing end to the series. So, for the conclusion, I guess at this point I've talked through the entire series. Everything that's been released for it so far. Obviously, Spiral is eventually and I'll definitely be doing something about that when that eventually releases. As far as it stands, my rankings, I'm gonna put Saw 1 on top. That one is a legitimately good movie that mostly anyone could enjoy. After Saw 1, I really enjoy Saw 5 and 6, basically equally up here. Where I just love Hoffman. I love the campiness. I love the slasher Hoffman. After that, it gets a little muddier. I'd probably say 2 next. 2 and 4 are on a similar level. 2's a little actually better. 4's kind of exciting and weird. And we do get a little Hoffman in there too, which I'm always a fan. Jigsaw is a little plain for me. I'm gonna put that underneath. You know, it's not horrible, it's watchable, but it feels a little neutered, it feels a little awkward, feels a little too clean. Saw 3 and Saw 3D are both on the bottom. Saw 3 is just not that entertaining. Saw 3D, you know, it is what it is. Might have broke the camp meter a little with that one. So I don't think it works that well. Yeah, so that's my general thoughts on the series, my general outlook on it. I think as a whole, the series does some interesting things. I mean, it shifts tone and genre quite a bit. Not genre so much, but I mean, I guess it kind of does. It's a little all over the place, but there's like this really good sense of continuity that makes it interesting to watch them all, to see the pieces kind of get bullshitted together. Like, obviously, there wasn't continuity planned. They tried to end the series after basically every movie from what I've read. But they're just sticking more and more stuff in. But it's interesting to see the reverence it has for itself, the reverence it has for its characters and locations, to constantly bring them back and reference them and reuse and remix, which is an aspect I think is really strong about it. I think the movies, you know, they're not going to be for everyone, but some of them, there will be a Saw movie that you will enjoy, you know? It's like, Saw 1 and 2 have more serious tones. The middle ones go a little bit into the more gory, weird, horror-y aspects. Not like full-blown horror, obviously, but in their own way. And then the later ones are all like weird, campy, awkward, hilarious messes. And it's hard to click all the pieces of the franchise together. And I'd love to see, well, I don't know about that. I was going to say, I'd love to see James Wan and Leigh Whannell come back and do another one eventually, but James Wan's style is so different from at that point in time, you know, with him doing like Aquaman and Conjuring, that I don't know that it would work. But him and Leigh Whannell have also worked together on the Conjuring and stuff like that. And Leigh Whannell's now directing Upgrade, which was fantastic. He just made The Invisible Man, which was fairly good, decent. Certainly no Upgrade. I would strongly recommend Upgrade, but it's interesting to see the series evolve from its really, really simple, low-budget roots into some kind of strange, messy series of movies that are all just so different and so awkward, but still all trying to connect together and flow together and like tell this big continuous story. You know, it's exciting. I generally do like it. I would actually recommend sitting down and trying to get through all these movies, just to see, because there is really something about it that draws me back to it repeatedly. This is a video I actually had the concept for back in 2017 and abandoned, but came back to it. And I bought the games for this series. They're terrible. I watched the shorts. They're mostly terrible. But, you know, it is, in its own way, it's one of my favorite series. And I just wanted to take some time and tell people about them, have a laugh, make fun of them, and also just say why I like them in the way that I do, because I do generally like these movies. So, I know this is a messy conclusion, this whole video. A little messy. I decided to go this more impromptu route about it, instead of writing about 8 movies, 2 games, and a bunch of things, a bunch of shorts and odds and ends. There will be full reviews of the games coming out, hopefully relatively close to the release of this video. Individual reviews. But that is about everything from me. So I hope you enjoyed watching me talk about Saw. I'd love to do this again with another series sometime. I'm not sure which one. But I think that about sums up everything that Saw is. And hopefully Spiral will come out soon, and I will kind of throw that into some kind of update. I was planning on having it as a part of this video, but thanks, China. Anyway, have a good night.